This week on the Frame Savers, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Hey, welcome to the podcast. We are the Frame Savers. If you're new to us, we are a retro video game podcast that focuses on speedrunning. Speedrunning is a hobby where we try to beat video games as quickly as possible using whatever tricks, glitches, and stratagems we have available to us. And this is episode 82 of the Frame Savers. 82, Chad. They have kept us around this long.
I can't believe they're still letting us do this, honestly.
I don't know who they are. That's probably a big part of it, but we're still doing this, which is great. And we are right now live on twitch.tv/theframesavers. So shout outs to the chat. Thank you all for hanging out with us. But before we dive into this episode that's about a game I like very much, and you probably know what game it is because that's how titles work, we will be talking about Parasite Eve. But before that, Chad, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. What have you been up to this week?
Well, my best friend got married, so that was really cool. So I was in his wedding. I've been kind of pulled away from my stream doing rehearsal dinners and setups and yada yada. So been a little bit off the Twitch. I got to play bass at it for half a song, so that was fun. That had been a long time. So that was a fun little treat, but good time there. And outside of that, I played this game all the way through this past week, which was a lot of fun. We both did. I had beaten it before about 4 years ago, and you had never played it before, so we both got to enjoy going through it. And other than that, Game Boy Quest, I've been doing some spoopy stuff, you know. For this month, I'm focused on the spoopy, and so are you.
Yeah, there's a lot of spooky things happening, like me speedrunning Secret Scout again. That's been pretty spooky. I also did play through this casually on stream. Whenever we do episodes, especially with really big games like this, a lot of times smaller games is pretty easy. You can sit down and play it for about 20 minutes and get a sense of what to expect from it, and then go the rest of the way by watching speedruns or whatever. But for longer games like this, we really do try to invest heavily. And so usually John will be like, hey, you should play such and such hours or up to this point in the game. And I think you had told me, like, you should probably get through at least day 4. Yeah. Which, I mean, looking back at it, that makes a lot of sense. But I actually really ended up having a good time. I had anticipated just playing for a few more hours during my second session, and it ended up being a 7-hour stream where I finished the game. So
yeah,
it was a lot of fun.
Time too. It was cool getting to beat it a second time and re-experience it kind of with new eyes and kind of try and see if I could find things I didn't find the time before, and also seeing it through the eyes of doing the podcast rather than just casual play. So that's a lot of fun. We're also joined here by our friend Professor Palmer. How are you doing, bud? And what have you been streaming?
I'm doing well, guys, and I have also been streaming Parasite Eve for the most part.
Which is a more regular thing for you to do than for us.
Absolutely.
So if you're looking for some speedrun content coming up soon here, we've got some cool events going on. We've got GDQX happening October 26th to the 28th. That's the big speedrun marathon at TwitchCon. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's the first time that will have happened, and so it'll be cool to see speedrunning kind of exhibited at this large Twitch event, and that's at twitch.tv/gamesdonequick. We also have Tiny 10 number 8 coming up in a few weeks. We've talked about Tiny 10 a bunch. You know that Chad and I are huge Game Boy fans, and so this is a cool little 10-game marathon race that happens try to happen about twice a year, I think. And this will be November 10th, 2018. I don't know why I'm reading the year, but that is this year. I don't know why I typed it there. And that'll be on twitch.tv/speedgaming. So that'll be a lot of fun. I always enjoy watching those. I might maybe hop on some commentary.
They've got some good games lined up this time too.
Yeah.
We're not doing like a whole episode about it. They've got their own podcast. This is Game Boy, and they tore through the entire list. If you want to hear a breakdown of the Tiny 10 list, you should definitely check out their podcast. They did a whole episode on it. But the list is actually pretty solid. It's got Maru's Mission, which is a big fan. John's a big fan of. It's got Rubble Saver 2, which both of us are a big fan of. There's a lot of actually really solid Game Boy games on the Tiny 10 list this time around. There's just a few games that are sort of... I mean, every list always has like its puzzle game that's meant to throw off the blind runners, but this list is actually pretty solid, so...
Yeah, and I have a lot of fun, you know, watching these, commentating them, and I've run in them. So definitely check that out. And check out This is Game Boy. They did do a down episode of that, which is cool. We used to do a lot more Big 20 and big Tiny 10 kind of coverage. I realized that as like the last Big 20 passed, and we didn't even we forgot to promote it. It was weird. So, but we've always been a big fan of these events. So, and also we have DreamHack Atlanta 2018 coming up. What is that? I don't actually know.
Yeah, so the DreamHack events that take place, they have a new one in Atlanta. I actually don't really know much about DreamHack in general, but they've had the... Palmer, you can probably tell me what goes on at DreamHack. You've done one of their marathons, right?
Yes, I have. It's basically like it's not quite PAX level, but it's like a technology convention for the most part. And they, lots of the big computer companies, big, Fortnite, PUBGs, things like that, they have there as well with like live tournaments for those, Hearthstone, Smash. And yeah, now they've included speedruns in it. I ran this game actually, Parasite Eve, at DreamHack Austin this earlier this year.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, they've got a new one out of Atlanta now, so that's going to be better. For me, if I ever decide to go to one, it won't be across the country somewhere. I can actually go to the one in Atlanta, but that'll be November 16th. And if you want to watch the speedrun marathon portion of it, you can find that twitch.tv/no-reset-marathon, which is, I think, the location that most of the DreamHack events get posted to, if I'm not mistaken, at least the ones that are in North America.
Yeah, so those are some cool events coming up that you can check out on Twitch. A couple quick announcements. I mean, we did just re-release our merch. I think we talked about that last time, but if you're looking to get these shirts, a lot of people have been asking us to bring them back, or hoodies, anything like that. Go ahead and check that out on our Streamlabs. I believe if you're watching the stream, you can see it there in our panels, and hopefully we'll be coming out with some newer merch soonish, but people wanted this old design, so you can go ahead and grab that. Also, we joined the Warp World Podcast Network, which we mentioned last time, but check them out at podcast.warp.world. We are now part of their network, which includes Warp World, which is a Twitch news, gaming news podcast, and then Warp World Historians, which is a history podcast that focuses on different game each episode like we do. So those two podcasts are awesome. We definitely recommend checking them out. This week, though, we're talking about Parasite Eve. We said that before. Why are we talking about Parasite Eve? Well, the first thing is it's October. We're doing all horror this month, which is fun. But that's five episodes of horror, right?
A lot of horror.
3 pockets, two full episodes. So we did your Ghostbusters episode. We did Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, and I just did a pocket that'll be coming out tomorrow if you are here live, but you'll have already heard it if you listen to the podcast on the Castlevania Game Boy games. So really enjoying getting an opportunity to do that. But also, this is one of my favorite games growing up. I really enjoyed this as a kid. I never beat it, but what's fun about this game is I have a new appreciation for it playing it, because I think this game was kind of like Starship Troopers when you're a kid. You don't know Starship Troopers isn't serious, right? You don't actually know that when you're a kid. And now it has this new kitschy this game's very kitschy and silly, in the way that Starship Troopers or a movie that Anaconda, something you would have maybe taken seriously as a kid and been like, oh, that's so cool.
Just a lot of really absurd stuff.
Yeah, it's a very weird, more sci-fi than horror type game that just has it's not a bad plot. It's not a bad game that's so good it's bad, but it's it's in that realm. I feel it's got some strange goofiness to it. I don't know. So what about you? What let you allow me to put this game in? I've been asking you to play it forever. I guess that's what...
I mean, it's pretty much that. When we decided this October that we were going to do all Halloween themed games, which is not something we've ever done before. You know, we've done a lot of horror themed games already, so our ability to stick to pure retro in the purest sense is a little bit harder. So this was sort of like a, hey, John loves Parasite Eve, let's take a crack at it. And I'm kind of glad we did, because I ended up enjoying it, but maybe a little bit surprising.
Absolutely. What got you into Parasite Eve, Palmer?
It's actually, I was running a Final Fantasy game at the time, and it took too long. And I remembered that I had played Parasite Eve once, and it was super unique. I think the biggest thing is just how, you know, I kind of crave that uniqueness. Like, not a lot of people have seen this, and it's that one of those games where half the people, you're like, Parasite Eve, they're like, oh my gosh, and the other half are like, what is that?
Yeah.
And the aesthetic, the uniqueness of the battle, you know, it just has a lot of individual aspects about it that kind of kept me.
You're just trying to bring it to the masses, you know. You're just trying
to
bring the good stuff to the people.
On the prophet of Parasite Eve, that's what it is.
And we got John the Baptist of Parasite Eve over here, claiming the way. Speaking of that music, though, let's go ahead and take a quick break. Listen to some of that fresh music from composer. What's her name? What's her name? Chad. Yoko Shimomura. His or her name? I don't know. I thought you just
Yoki Shimomura.
Yeah, of course. Listen to some of that awesome music, and we'll be right back to talk about the game. So as we stated, we're going to be talking about Parasite Eve, which is a really awesome game that I grew up with. And as Palmer was just kind of talking about, a lot of people, some people did grow up with this game. It did sell almost 2 million copies, but then also a lot of people aren't aware of it. It doesn't have that same name recognition that a lot of the survival horror games of this period of time had, like Resident Evil, Silent Hill. So some people have not really even heard of this game. This was released in March of 1998 in Japan and September of 1998 in North America. Developed by Square, very well known for their RPGs, obviously, and their influence on Final Fantasy. And it was published by Square in Japan and Square Electronic Arts in North America. Produced by Hironobu Sakaguchi and directed by Takashi Tokita. And so the background of this game is actually interesting, and I never knew this as a kid or before I did research for this, but this is actually the sequel to a novel. So there was this novel called Parasite Eve, written by Hideaki Sena in 1995. And so this video game serves as actually a sequel to this book. And this book is actually noted for being, and the game are noted for being kind of a catalyst or part of the rise of popularity for Japanese horror at this time in the late 1998. Stuff like The Ring and things like that were kind of bringing this renaissance of Japanese horror to Japan. And I guess Parasite Eve, I believe this book was a lot more popular in Japan than we would have known about, which seems pretty cool.
Yeah, people in my chat were telling me about it because during the game, your buddy Medeo, I can't remember his name.
The scientist Medea.
Yeah, he tells you a lot of stories about things that had happened in Japan with the previous mitochondrial Eve or whatever, and that's all
what the book's about. Okay.
That's basically the plot of the book.
Oh, that's so cool! I didn't realize that.
He sort of like gives you the Cliff's Notes version of it real quick. Yeah. Is the idea.
That's so cool. I didn't realize that was the book. That makes so much sense.
Right.
So that's alluded to a lot, and I'm sure people who, if they had read the book, would really have enjoyed that, you know, being able to kind of have that second part of the story. Actually, Sena, the writer of this book, didn't know the game's plot until the game was released. So Square, I guess, exclusively communicated with his publisher. So even though he wrote the initial book story of this, they were like, we don't need you to, you know, decide where this story goes next. Kind of interesting.
Seems like he'd be the one you'd want to loop in, but
it does seem that way. But I mean, maybe that story makes a little more sense than this one then, because you know, this one it has the plot. It sure does. It sure is a story. So this is actually pretty interestingly Squaresoft's first ever rated M game as well. And also the first one where there was major collaboration between the American and Japanese teams for the company, which is cool. And this, like I said, this is kind of representative of this resurgence in Japanese horror, and received 2 sequels as well. It received a Parasite Eve 2 the next year in 1999, and then way later, 11 years later, the third birthday in 2010. And this game was released, re-released on PSN, it looks like around 2010, 2011.
Yeah, this game has a really just sort of absurd space that exists in, and it's very strange to think that it follows in the footsteps of a book, because I feel like this game doesn't really know what it wants its story to be, and I feel like that you can get away with that with a game, right? With a game, it can sort of just be this loosely cobbled together collection of ideas, and you just sort of traverse it, just experiencing it the whole way, and nobody will give you a lot of grief. But to have this follow in the wake of a book, I mean, I feel like you got to flesh a book out a little better, right?
Well, it's strange because Square did such a great job of writing such a coherent story in Final Fantasy VII that you would think in a game like this, you know, it would have been just as cohesive and made just as much sense. But that's obviously sarcasm. But I don't know who was writing for Square at this time and writing their stories, but I don't know. They were interesting people. I'd like to meet that man or woman and just, you know.
There was like a hiring process. There was like a hiring process. It was like, are you, you know, even tempered and willing to focus on a task? Okay, you're a programmer. Are you not? Okay, you're one of the writers. It's like that was the hiring process.
Yeah, I don't know. But this story, I mean, let's dive into the story real quick. I mean, we're not going to be able to thing, but essentially the game is divided into 6 days, which is kind of a cool mechanic. You know, the story is progressing in that way. Although I don't think it represents days in the game, right?
It does.
Oh, does the final events happen 6
day.
days later? Okay, I thought it was. So each one is 1 day. And so essentially the story starts off, you're Aya, you're a fresh rookie NYPD cop, and you are going to the opera with this guy on a date. And essentially all the people in the opera start catching on fire, which is bad. That's a negative thing. And the singer, who is named Melissa, she's this opera singer up front, she's not catching on fire. So it appears she is catching them on fire in some sort of magical way, and that kind of starts the investigation of what's going on. There's a lot of pseudoscience going on in this, a lot of mitochondria. I mean, I don't know. I feel like, Chad, I feel like you can explain this a bit better as someone who just saw it fresh for the first time.
Okay, so I'm as someone who has taken a lot of biology classes but does not purport to know anything about biology, I'm going to tell you what bits I know and what bits I don't. So the fact of the matter is that this is very loosely based on pseudoscience that is almost plausible. So the idea here is that, you know, back when we were single-celled organisms, we merged with these other creatures, and those are the mitochondria that are inside each of our cells, which up till that part in the story is actually kind of true. I mean, that's the basis of how multi-celled organisms formed, was the joint partnership between the creatures that became our mitochondria and our single-celled ancestors. But then where we really split off heavily is in this story, the mitochondria have continued to evolve and are actually just using humans to continue to progress evolutionarily. And so now they are ready to take over. And so now these super evolved mitochondria are causing all of these problems, and they can make all of these supernatural things happen. And honestly, if the game couldn't explain to me this story in 10 hours of playing it, I don't think I can explain it on this podcast.
First of all, super impressed. That was a really well...
That was actually really well done.
Articulated synopsis of the plot. I'm very impressed. Second of all, it seems like you're saying you don't find it a very realistic plot, is what you're saying.
I'm saying that what's really impressive about this is that someone sat in a biology class and said, wow, there's like a really neat idea here, and I bet I could turn it into a cool horror story.
Yeah.
But it really goes in the direction of fake science real fast. Like, we started off in a real cool place, and then we took a hard turn. So,
yeah, it's
I
actually.
mean,
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah, it's actually funny. The author had a PhD in pharmacology, so with the book and the movie, they both are kind of like, you know, they space off each other, and it's, if you watch it, you're like, you know, this is like somebody was really interested in this and knew enough about it to maybe create something that could almost happen, and that way it makes it a lot easier to explain the game.
It's like if you know enough about religion, you can make up your
yeah,
right?
exactly.
Like you can like use the parts of things you've learned, and you're like, okay, piece this together. They just took some science, and they're like, well, we can just make more science out of it, right?
Yeah, and nobody can come in and say this can't happen.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, all jokes aside, like, Parasite Eve is very clearly like leaning hard into the pseudoscience, but it's still really fascinating because most stories that try to give a scientific background to paranormal things that are happening, they do such a terrible job. But this one, like, it feels like it has a basis in something that I'm like, oh yeah, that's true from biology. You know, the symbiotic relationship that our mitochondria had with our single-celled ancestors. But I mean, obviously the direction it goes isn't ideal, but it starts really well-founded.
I think it's really cool because most horror games are just like very much based off the same themes. Here's zombies, here's possession, demons, you know, monsters. And so it's really cool to have a game kind of thinking outside the box. And, you know, the attacks coming from within the house, within the body, it's your mitochondria. I don't know how they've evolved in such a quick time. They don't really explain that too well, but maybe they do in the book.
Yeah, they in the book and the movie, which I highly recommend that you stay far away from. They do explain it a little bit better. But
is there a
that's
US
about
translation of the book?
Yeah, well, yeah, there is English copies of the book you can find probably online. But the movie is available in the same resolution the game is on YouTube entirety, and it is something else. It is
I've got my
definitely worth a
VHS.
watch. It is definitely worth a watch.
Filmed with a Game Boy camera. That's the way.
Exactly.
Outside of that, just some of the characters in the game, it's probably the best way to just kind of give a little bit more of an overview without diving into where the story goes. We also don't really want to spoil the ending too quickly, I guess. But you have Aya. The reason Aya is important, this mitochondrial attack, all these people catching on fire, she is special in some way that she does not catch on fire. She does not combust when she is near Eve, who is the Melissa is possessed basically by Eve. The mitochondria Eve is the thing taking her over and trying to spread itself, and
almost like a parasite.
A parasite. And Aya is, and essentially the story unfolds in a way where you find out why Aya does not react to the mitochondria that way. Her sister died when she was young, and there's kidney transplant. There's a whole lore going on there about, you know, that why she's special. But that's why you're the main character. That's her, because you're the only one who can fight this force. Daniel is her buddy cop, and so they flesh out his character a lot, and he's pretty likable. You've got Melissa, who is now Eve and being taken over. Dr. Clamp is like the evil scientist that's like trying to like, it's funny, he literally laughs at you for being like stupid humans, but like he's also a human, so I don't really understand that, but he's the evil maniacal scientist who's like,
I'll spoil part of it. He catches on fire eventually, so
yeah,
good for him.
It doesn't work out for him personally, but he is the one who I guess is sided with the mitochondria. He's done with being the human. So, and then Maeda, who's this Japanese scientist who I'm assuming may have been in the book, because he's the one telling you all the stuff about what happened in Japan.
He wasn't actually in the book or the movie, but he was definitely like the character that was meant to bridge. So basically, in the book or the movie, the biologist, you know, his wife dies, and he cultures her cells, which then turn into Eve out of some kind of freak accident. Well, Maeda was supposed to be like in the game. He says, "I was part of that biology team or whatever." But as far as like the character in the book or the movie, it wasn't exactly the same.
Oh, okay. And then go ahead.
A few complaints about character names. That's all I want to. I want to break this down for just a moment.
Okay.
Just a few complaints about character names.
Wait. Would you say you're picking nits right now?
I do plan to pick a few nits here.
Okay.
Okay. So first off, her name's Aya Brea, right? It just sounds like someone.
Yeah, Aya Brea.
Aya Brea. It honestly just sounds like someone said, "Well, we can't just name her AB." So like, Yeah, okay, we can make this
Well,
work.
I actually think of it because you've got Eve and then Aya, so it's like EE on each side, AA on each side, and then one has the Y, one has the V.
Now that's next level there. My other issue is that have you ever?
Because they're opposite sides of the thing. Because like the way they talk about her mitochondria.
No, that's actually crazy. That's blowing my mind right now.
That's what I was thinking, but I don't know.
So my second thing is that Aya has a sister named Maya, and have you ever heard of a situation where two siblings have rhyming names and you didn't think that their parents were real jerks?
Yeah, it's not cool. That's not a cool move.
And then the last thing is that my suspension of disbelief stopped the moment that the buddy cop was named Daniel, because we all know that if you had a buddy cop friend, his name would be Danny, not Daniel.
Oh, his name would be Danny, 100%.
Especially with his attitude.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I'm getting too old for this.
Yeah, he's basically, it's fun. He's basically Danny Glover weapon, which is great. You also have this buddy cop relationship. Some interesting facts to point out. Square decided to use New York City as the setting because it actually considered using New York City as the setting for FF7. You can see the FF7 city Midgar is very inspired by like a New York or a modern US city. And then Sakaguchi actually designed Aya thinking about Aerith from FF7. He wanted a similar long-haired protagonist. And so,
that makes sense.
And with that, yeah. Spoilers, so just to kind of wrap up the story section. So if you don't want to know the end of the story, maybe fast forward 1 minute or mute for a minute. But essentially the story progresses in a way in which Eve needs, like, her body's fading and she needs to basically have a child, and there's this whole weird baby sequence. It's why you end up finding a baby at the end, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, at some point. But basically she has to give birth to this ultimate being, and so it's a very strange ending. So that's kind of the whole path the story goes. There's a lot of twists and turns in between, but I think that's a pretty good summation.
I want to commend us on doing such a good job of condensing the story down, but we pretty much avoided ever explaining any of the story. Like, you couldn't walk away from this podcast having any idea what happens in the game, so I don't think we really accomplished anything. Sure. It's mostly just pointing out how absurd everything is.
Yeah, it's like Aya Brea, mitochondria, baby. That's it. There you go.
There you go. Yeah.
You know the story.
So one thing that I really like about this game, and then I liked about it so much when I had it back in 1998, is that the gameplay is just very unique. It's very different from a typical survival horror game, if you even consider this a survival horror game, but much different than a Resident Evil, Silent Hill, anything like that. This is an action RPG / survival horror with RPG elements. So, well, I guess action RPG. But it's an action RPG, so the combat system is much different. It's not RPG style combat system, but it's also not like Resident Evil live action combat. So you end up getting into these random encounters much like a normal RPG, but you can move around the screen, you know, think Secret of Mana or one of those kind of games, but all of the combat is with guns, and basically you still have turns that you have to take place. So you have an ATB meter, you can't attack until that fills up. You have Parasite Energy, PE, which is essentially magic in the game, allows you to heal, allows you to do certain secret abilities. And so it plays out like a typical turn-based RPG, but you're also moving around the screen. The closer you get to enemies, and the stats of the guns that you configure and all influence the amount of damage that you're inflicting. So the closer you are, the more chance it seems you have for a crit, but also you're just doing more damage. You'll get longer range weapons that'll make it easier to fight enemies from a further distance, especially if they have, difficult attacks, maybe for a boss or something that you would like to stay further away from. You can switch to a longer range weapon. And so it's kind of got this cool mixture between RPG, picking the weapon you want, maximizing your ATB, using your magic at the right time, and then this kind of moving around action-based influence the gameplay. I don't know. What do you think about it, Chad? I don't know if you've played a game like this before.
So I've played games similar to this. I feel like the combat system, the very first thing that I thought of when I played it was Quest 64. This idea that you can kind of run around as much as you want, and then you stop and you do an attack whenever you want to.
I just want to be clear that, Chad, you think about Quest 64 100% more than any other human.
I love Quest 64.
Think about that game.
I love Quest 64 so much. Okay.
I feel like it just comes up in these random moments.
Okay, I'm not going to be talked down to for loving Quest 64. If loving Quest 64 is wrong, then I'm just going to accept being wrong for the rest of my life.
Okay.
So I actually really liked it. At the beginning, I thought it was really cool. There was a lot of there's a lot to it, like positioning
nuance,
yourself
I
in the
feel
right
like.
ways, and it takes a while to get used to. Like I was sitting here thinking, okay, every time that my ATB meter fills up, I want to get as many shots as possible. And like halfway through my playthrough, John was like, actually, you'd be benefited by firing less shots during each time you get to take an action, because then you're not stationary for so long. I was like, yeah, that's kind of a neat idea. And there's like this subtle balance between trying to like maximize what you can do when you get to take a turn, but also staying pretty safe. So it has this really nice balance of action RPG, because you are on the move and you get full control, but that turn-based element sticks in, and you sort of are without control for that time. So it plays really nicely in that way.
Yeah, it's a big reason why I like playing with pistols in the game, because every weapon acts differently too. So the amount of time it takes to kind of aim up and shoot, like there can be a delay as you like set up or don't set up. And so you want to be able to move, because enemies have certain attacks that you can avoid, and you also get statuses just like an RPG. So there's a very frustrating section with these bats that can cast darkness on you, and it's hard to avoid them. And so you basically can't you're doing no damage
it's
because
awful.
you can't.
So bad.
It's like confusion. You're doing no damage, so you have to kind of avoid it to try and get out. So there is this actual gameplay element to it. I don't feel like it's shallow at all. It's definitely nuanced, and I appreciate that. You get a bunch of different weapons, as we said. So the weapons have various stats, and there's also a really cool mechanic to this game where you find items called tools. Tools can be used to upgrade your weapons, essentially by taking stats or an ability off one weapon and putting it on another. And so your weapons are, I like it because you're able to customize, but they also kept it very simple. Like you only have attack, range, your number of bullets, and then any status effects. It's not like there's 10 or 12 stats to your guns. There's 3 stats. And so it's easier to keep track of. It's easier to know, okay, I want more damage. Do I want more ATB? What am I looking for? You can do the same with your armor. So your armor has defense, PE, that's parasite energy or whatever, and then critical, and then also has slots for effects. And so you have a limited amount of these tools, and once you take an effect or a stat off of another gun, that gun is no longer usable. It breaks. So like you have to kind of decide, am I going to continue beefing up a gun in this way, because I'm going to lose all these other guns that I'm getting because I'm taking the abilities off them? Like what weapon am I building? An ultimate weapon? Do I want to have a long range weapon that's decent and a short range? It gives you kind of a lot of versatility for what your gameplay experience will be like, which I think is cool.
Yeah, I always just made a mega weapon. Every single time every single time I'd get a stat upgrade, I'd just put it on the same weapon over and over, and if I ever got a weapon that I thought was better, then I'd use a tool to move all of those upgrades over to the next weapon. So
Yeah,
I have to imagine that's probably most people's experience as well.
Yeah.
It's like you're not going to spread them out.
Yeah, it's hard because you don't really know going along what's best, especially if you're starting for the first time. You don't know what's most useful. Like you said, when I was a kid, I was putting like the ×5 shots on my best weapon, but that's actually like Crazy Awesome was in chat telling me actually it lowers the amount of damage you're doing, so it's like not actually beneficial. You want a lower number of shots. And I was like, well, you think bigger number better. So the nuance can be tough to adjust to, but I think it's really cool. And also there's really useful, like I feel like it puts you in a lot of decision processes where you're like, for example, there's armor you can get that'll automatically use a healing item if you die. So instead of dying, all your healing items you have, it'll automatically use it. But you end up getting to a point where you get much better armor, and you could strip all of the stats you've been boosting that armor with to the new armor, or you can carry over the automatic heal. And you kind of have to decide, do I want weaker armor but like guaranteed I don't die?
Okay, that was a real Sophie's choice for me when I was playing too, because I put a bunch of stats on my armor that I was using, and when I changed armors, I was like, I really want to take those stats, but this one also has extra pockets, and I really want extra pockets.
Oh, see, you were more into the inventory.
I'm a hoarder. I'm an RPG
You are.
hoarder.
You don't even use the items. You're
No,
just like,
I did.
What I need?
I was. Okay.
You're like, I need 100 revives. That's what
Okay.
I need, just in case I die 99 times.
Okay, but by the time I got to the museum, I was burning through. I was burning through some. I was the winner in that deal. Okay.
Here's Chad's approach. I have 100 revives. I will reload the save point and beat fight the second to last boss 1,000 times just so that I can fight the final boss, and even if I die 99 times, I won't fail. That's what you're saying. You're like, all the way at the end, maybe I'll use. I'm the same way. It's bad.
Maybe.
So I think the gameplay is really cool. Also, some of the RPG elements. As you level up, you gain new magic, you gain new parasite abilities, which can be really useful. It's kind of the typical RPG stuff. You have healing, you have curing poison, you have scanning the enemy, you have some attack-based ones, some regen. You have one that's really useful that for a time, if you die, it'll automatically revive you. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that you get along. And then also you gain these battle points that you can assign. And 100 battle points lets you either raise your ATB, so your ATB meter will fill up faster. You can raise the number of items in your storage, which pretty much I'm sure that's all of yours, Chad. Or you can raise an ability in one of your weapons. You can raise the attack one.
I didn't discover those points until like day 3 or 4. And when I discovered I had them, I was like, okay, well, I'll put a few into inventory. I didn't realize how much they cost. I burned all of them on inventory.
Yeah, you had a huge inventory and nothing else. So I think the ATB was like, I was like, Chad, put it in the ATB. You need it because then you can.
Well, for the rest of the game, because you can put, like you said, you can put it into ATB, you can put it into inventory space, or you can put it into specific weapons.
Yeah.
And for the rest of the game, I just put it into ATB. I never put it into weapons.
Yeah, I got to put a lot of it into weapons at the end. I had kind of a good balance and didn't need any more items. So, but again, the game provides a lot of nuance and different ways of playing. Before I dive into the reception, though, I want to start a new segment. I don't know. Should this be named after you or me? I'm going to let you make that decision.
It should be named after you, I guess.
Okay, because I created it, I guess. But I want to have a section of Picking of Nits. John Carl's sponsored Picking of Nits section. So you picked some nits about the names. That was really good. Actually, I really liked that. The Danny Daniel thing, that hit me right here. I was like, you're totally right. That they blew it. They choked that one. Unbelievable. There's one part of the story, and I'm obviously you can knock some holes in the story, right? But I as like a new rookie, like NYPD cop, right? Like with a grizzled veteran cop. She's not a helicopter pilot. She's not an army sergeant, right? But they're like, you have to go up in this helicopter and do it because you're shoot these missiles at Eve because some giant attack thing's happening. Doesn't matter for this part, but you have to go up there and shoot the missile because you're the only one who will catch on fire. Okay, makes sense to me. She's like, I don't know how to fly a helicopter. Like, it'll fly itself automatically. We've set it to auto. So there's a button, I guess. You can just set this thing to auto. Let's suspend our belief and believe that's true. And then she's flying in, and all these other helicopters with living people in them, have to fly in front of her and get destroyed to clear the way for her. They're all dying. They're sacrificing their lives, and she feels terrible about it. But her helicopter is flying itself. Why can't they just fly those helicopters by them?
They didn't have enough money for all of them to be
there was a prototype. They only had one.
This bothered me very much. You don't get it both ways.
Yeah,
very frustrating.
I'm with you. People in my chat were saying that, and I was saying that during that cutscene. It was like, why can't they fly themselves?
I mean, maybe they need human matter that like the energies come. I don't know.
That's what it is.
Mitochondria. That's the answer, probably.
I mean, if they can fly themselves, why can't they shoot themselves? They don't even have to send Aya up, right?
It's a very confusing thing that occurred in the story. I was not pleased. So, gonna call up whoever worked at Square Enix during this time. I'm gonna ask a lot of questions about Final Fantasy VII, and I'm gonna ask. That's all. Those are the questions I'd ask them. So just to wrap up this kind of background section, the reception. This game sold over 1.9 million copies as of February 2004. I think that's pretty good. Not like so it wasn't like a huge seller, but a lot of people did grow up with it, and I think that's why you see this experience. Like Palmer was saying, like half the people are like, "Oh, I played that game as a kid. That was fun," and then a lot of people are like, "I've never heard of this."
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It was never released in any of the PAL regions either.
Sure.
So to get the greatest hits and stuff with only those releases is, something.
Yeah, they had like Asterix and Obelix. They were just doing that.
They were so excited about Asterix.
They probably had a survival horror
busy.
and Obelix over there at the time, and they just didn't want it. So this game received generally favorable reviews. Like Metacritic, it's an 81 out of 100. Usually the ratings for the things you've heard of were somewhere between 7 and 8, usually like a 7.5. It was praised a lot for its beautiful graphics and its cinematic cutscenes. There's a lot of cutscenes in this game. We'll get into all that with the ratings, but there's a lot of different cutscenes where they were, pushing the graphics of the time, similar to FF7. And also for its mature tone, it is a bit more of a mature game, just in terms of, I guess, more the graphical stuff. It's not sexual in nature. There's not really like swearing or anything, but it's just a very kind of gory game, and which is very new for Square. It was also panned for its linearity being just very straightforward and also just lacking a lot of replayability. I mean, you got to think, coming off of a game like Resident Evil, even, or comparing it to FF7 from Square, this a lot less replayability. So, but it got generally good reviews, and I think it's kind of considered, I don't know, a bit of a hidden gem. It's probably in between hidden gem and like well known, but I mean, I don't know. It's somewhere there, right?
I feel like from people that I know who know this game, it's well loved, but
yeah,
not enough people know it. I guess it's got sort of that cult classic status then, in that way.
Yeah, I would say it's got a bit of that cult classic, but it's a little bit more popular. Like, it was definitely not like under the radar at the time. I mean, I bought it. I mean, it was known, but it's still, now today, a lot of people don't look back, and they're gonna look back at Silent Hill, Resident Evil, and those, and say those are the start kind of series, especially because of the differences between this and other survival horror. So let's go ahead, take a quick break, and then we can dive into our ratings and game.
So as usual, we want to break this game down with our ratings before we jump into talking about the speedrun, and as usual, we'll break it down by our normal graphics, music and sound, controls and gameplay, difficulty and fairness, fun and replayability, and then any final comments and a score. This game is probably going to be a little easier to talk about in some regards, because a lot of times the retro games that we talk about, graphics are always like, it's serviceable, but we're entering the PS1 era here. This is, some pre-rendered graphics, some graphics on the fly. So I think this will be a little easier to talk about. So what do you think about the graphics?
Just in general, some of our categories like replayability and graphics, those two especially, are a tougher thing to analyze for a 16 and 8-bit game, right? Like, replayability wasn't something that people were that concerned about at the time. It was more about, if we make it hard enough, you'll get playability out of it. And the graphics were all pretty similar. The graphics of this were pretty mind-blowing for the time, similar to FF7. I mean, these were really good graphics at the time, and I remember these cutscenes being like FF7, where they're really cool and really well detailed. It does a better job of consistency than FF7 does between, your standard gameplay and your cinematic cutscenes, and having some consistency. That's something we talked about back in our FF7 episode. That's a big complaint now, right? You have these weird blocky chibi versions of the characters, then you have like these tall artistic anime ones, then you have these cutscenes that are realistic. You're like, what am I supposed to be picturing here? So this game's very consistent. It's got a lot of gore. I mean, it's got a lot of these weird transformations where like a dog will turn into an evil dog. That's mitochondria taking over its body, whatever. So those scenes are really cool, I think. I don't know.
Yeah,
Did you like those? Or
it's got great pre-rendered cutscenes. The pre-rendered graphics are good. I mean, you can get away with a lot in this era if you just keep a fixed camera perspective, because then you can pre-render pretty much everything. And I mean, you really get away with murder in a lot of ways doing that.
A lot of the discussion would be just, it's very similar to FF7, to be honest, because the same exact, like, pre-rendered, you can walk on this pre-rendered area, and it kind of just tells, it
I think they did it.
Looks like it's 3D, but it's really just you walking on a pre-rendered background.
So outside of that discussion, I think that they did a good job of setting the scene. I mean, it does feel like New York City from this era. The pre-rendered cutscenes for things like the mitochondrial biological things that are happening when it pulls away to pre-rendered cutscenes, like they somehow didn't feel like they aged really poorly. You know how sometimes cutscenes from this era feel like they aged really poorly? Some of these don't feel that bad. They're obviously not completely lifelike in any regard, but they're pretty good. They work. So
I agree. And also, Aya is a babe.
Yeah.
So, big fan. I mean, where do you rank Aya in terms of your, like, crushes on the PS1? You got your Lara Crofts, you got your Tifa, you got... Who's the babe of PS1?
I mean, Tifa and Yuffie were pretty up there for me, but I didn't have a lot of experience with the PS1, so for me, PS1 was really just Final Fantasy VII.
Yeah. What
I
about
mean,
you,
Lara Croft...
I shouldn't spring this on you. I should have prepared you, but I would say my number one's Tifa always. But then Aya Bray's second for me.
Yuffie is definitely number one. Sorry.
Okay. Sure. I mean, we can have this discussion about Zelda's, which is the best Zelda, but we all know it's just Breath of the Wild. So
it's Breath of the Wild Zelda.
My favorite PS1 babe was actually Garnet from Final Fantasy IX.
There you go.
Shows my age a little bit.
I think I might go the girl in FF8.
Ooh.
Who's the girl in FF8? The black hair.
Some crush.
I know. Well, it was a boring game. The game sucks.
Yeah, it was.
Not my fault. Not my fault. She's still cute. So, anyways, just a little,
Renoa.
Tweet at us. Let us know who your PS1 babe is at the Frame Savers on Twitter. I want to know. But yeah, the graphics are cool. I mean,
we can
obviously,
make a Babes of PS1 calendar.
Ooh.
Obviously, I mean, these cutscenes haven't aged as if they're timeless art, but like they still are serviceable in 2018, which is really impressive 20 years later. And at the time, they're really cool. They're also fairly kind of graphic. So like there's a lot of weird stuff you see. I mean, that's definitely worth noting. I mean, you have the giant pregnant Eve at one point that's like also got like tentacles. I mean, there's just a lot of that weird. It's like Sephiroth, but like on steroids. It's like, okay, you got these weird Sephiroths or whatever. Now it's like this giant pregnant like demon woman. And
now that you mention it, this is real Japanese.
The baby, and it makes the baby noises. Oh man, that's a weird one. I mean, the final boss, the first couple forms are a baby, so you're literally shooting a baby, which feels wrong. Yes, it feels wrong. Not to off. I mean, that's a thing that he's used to, but like, yeah, the art is weird. The art style is really strange and weird, but I like it. The enemies are really strange and weird, but they're varied, and I like them as well. Like all the different models are. Look good and interesting. You fight dinosaurs and polar bears and all kinds of interesting stuff. So yeah, the graphics all around are silly, but they kind of take themselves seriously. And like you said, the cutscenes that go into the cell and stuff are actually really cool still, I think. Those still have aged pretty well, in my opinion. Like the ones where they go down and show what the mitochondria is doing or what's going on inside the body. I think those still look pretty good. So it's usually like human figures that they try and render that end up aging pretty poorly. But these ones haven't aged as poorly as FF7s, at least. Like Aya and Daniel look pretty good. Like when Daniel jumps out of the helicopter and is on fire, you're like, hey,
whoa,
Daniel, and he's on
no
fire.
Spoilers.
Greatest scene in all.
How did you feel about that scene? Did you like that scene?
I just cackled. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And it was really funny because the reason why he caught on fire was not because he had hit terminal velocity breaking through the atmosphere, but at that moment, that's kind of the picture you get. Is like he's just falling so fast that he catches on fire, and that's just the funniest thing I've ever seen.
Well enough that he can throw the bullets accurately to her on the boat, which is nice, and lands in the water, doesn't die. Very much appreciated. I think this is maybe my second favorite ridiculous video game scene behind Cliffhanger, when you kill the guy and then snowboard down his.
Yep, that's a good one.
That you just don't see that one coming at all. This was. I mean, it was great. It was very heroic, and his name should be Danny. So what about music and sound? I
think all the music's really great. You hear the battle scene, or you hear the battle music more than anything else in the game, and it's a pretty, the track whips, so it's good.
It does.
There's a lot of really solid music in this game. I don't remember hearing any of it and thinking this is just getting really old.
Sure.
Maybe the fact that I haven't played it in 3 or 4 days, I've forgotten all of the terrible things. But in general, I don't remember any of the tracks not being, real bangers.
Sure. Yeah, this music's really good. It was composed by Yoko Shimomura and acclaimed for her work to create an organic and emotional soundtrack. This soundtrack was actually released like 10 years later or something. Like, people were asking for the soundtrack to be released. The score was met with critical acclaim. It's known as one of her more original soundtracks, and she uses influences from opera, piano, techno, and electronica. And you can really tell that listening to it. Me being a huge fan of the piano, especially, like, I love piano music. And the way she blends that in with like the electronica vibe is so good. And really, like, it brings a lot of energy. It's very unique. Like, it's not the kind of music you just hear in a lot of games. It's not just like, oh, here's some hype kind of classically inspired rock music. Like, it's much more trippy, and I really like that. And she actually, even though her previous work, she had been lead composer on Super Mario RPG, which is also very well known for having an awesome soundtrack. Parasite Eve was actually her breakout project.
Well, this makes a lot of sense this makes a lot of sense that she was the lead composer on Super Mario RPG. That soundtrack's full of bangers too. So
yeah, so I really so hard. And the way that the music blends in with the environment, like you said, like, they do a really good job having New York City. There's a lot of bleak sections of the game, and like, just the way the music sets the tone of kind of this strange sci-fi adventure in the winter and these bleak spots. Like, it fits really well. When you go to the police station, it's like up and bumping and kind of like 80s 90s cop kind of thing going on. Like, all the music fits its spots perfectly, and I love this music so much. It definitely one of those ones that as soon as I hear the track, like, it takes me back to 1998 when I was playing this game. It's one of those kind of soundtracks that really just attaches itself to the game for me.
So this is the part we're going to disagree on, but since we're talking about music and sound, we have to talk about their use of silence throughout the game.
Yeah.
I know that I'm the one with the unpopular opinion. I hate it. I hate the quantity of silence that there is in this game, because I think that strategic use of silence can be very helpful. I think when you have a really dramatic moment, silence forces you to focus more heavily on the visual aspect of it versus what you're hearing. But the quantity of silence and the ways in which they use it really feel almost lazy at times. There's perfectly fine cutscenes that aren't these dramatic moments or anything like that, and you could add ambient sounds, you could add, some light background music or something like that just to break up the silence. But you'll go through these periods of times where you'll have characters talking to one another for 10 minutes straight, and no sound at all is coming out of your TV, and it starts to become really distracting in that way.
Yeah. Absolutely. I actually kind of agree with you. I didn't feel it the way you did. Like, I felt it when I was watching you, but like when I did it myself, it didn't bother me. But I could see, I think silence is a powerful tool, and I like the way that they were using it, but they maybe just didn't use it lightly enough. Like, they probably just laid it on too heavy, if that even makes sense for something that's not there, right?
So it feels like it's the side.
It feels like they could have gone for 20 seconds of silence in the scene to kind of set it and then ease in some music. Then
it feels like it was the side effect of a meeting where they were like, hey, we should use some silence because it can be unsettling for a player. We're going for this sort of realistic but spooky atmosphere. So, a little bit of silence goes a long way. And the sound designer said, silence, you want silence? I understand. I'll take it from here.
Yeah, it does feel that way, and I would agree. I like the idea, and I do appreciate the addition of it versus just like background music over everything, especially for dramatic scenes. But they probably should have used it for less scenes and for shorter periods of time, for sure. But it doesn't stand out to me for some reason as much as it was to you. I think that's more just the difference. I think also, in a similar vein, moving kind of to controls and gameplay, the way the game unfolds, there are a lot of like unevenly paced sections where you are talking a lot and not getting to shoot your gun at like I want to shoot my gun at something and just shoot it a bit, and you're just like, oh, okay, yeah, and then the mitochondria went here, and then kidney was transplanted. You're just like,
the video that's playing on our video right now, like the video that's playing right now, the part that's on is the worst offender of that. It's like right at the beginning of day, it's like day 3 or day 4, and it's just, it's just the longest cutscene full of people talking. It's all silent, and the whole time I'm just sitting there saying, well, I just got done with some real fun stuff. When do I get to shoot the gun again?
Yeah, it is strange because most games you would think, okay, they're gonna start laying the story on thick late, right? And like as things build up, and you're gonna, I mean, look at something like FF7. I keep going back to that, but same company, same around the same year. Like the end of that game, you have like way less gameplay than story. You're just like piled on story. This game like gives you this weird section, like you said, like around maybe day 3, like more like the middle or closer to the beginning, where you're just getting a lot of story and not getting to shoot stuff, and it kind of gets frustrating. And then most of the end of the game is like a lot of action. So that's just kind of strange. The gameplay is a lot of fun though. I think we both lauded, you know, the combat system. I enjoy it quite a bit. It doesn't get old to me or stale very easily. I mean, eventually it would, but you know, for the period of time that this game lasts, I think it's perfect. And you know, some sections can get frustrating, especially like the museum. You have to do a lot more encounters than you need, and if you don't know the direction to go, it kind of sucks having to go through these battles. There's not really a well set up escape system. I think you can escape a battle, but I don't know how.
Once your ATB meter fills up, you can go into the menu and there's a runaway option. I discovered that, by the way, on day 6 during the final boss, and said, wow, that would have been real nice.
I ran the game for like a year before I figured that out.
Yeah, so it's good it's there, but they obviously, if somebody's speedrun the game for a year and doesn't know it's an option, it clearly shows that it's maybe not highlighted properly.
I'm sure the tutorial tells you, but God, I opened up the tutorial when so when you start the game up, you get the options in new game, continue, or tutorial, and I said, all right, well, if they feel like they need to put a tutorial on the title screen, then it's obviously important. And I clicked one button and saw what they wanted me to read and pay attention to, and I said, nah, I'll figure it out. Yeah. So it was just too boring. I do want to make one comment about gameplay, and it's exactly what you said. It really ties into fun a lot, but the gameplay, I think that the game does a really good job of making the encounters fun to have, but there are a lot of repetitive sections where you just have way too many encounters. So the sewers, if you're sort of not sure exactly where to go and you're wandering around for a little bit, there's a ton of encounters there. When you're finally in the museum, I mean, I was in the museum for what, like 2.5 hours or something, 2 hours. So, I mean, I probably did several hundred encounters over my time in the museum. I was just tired of encounters. They were, at that point in the game, they weren't hard. They were just tedious.
Yeah, I got lucky and went almost the exact right path through the museum. Like I think I got one additional encounter from like re-encountering a room. So I got very lucky because I remember when I played it 4 years ago, I was in the museum a very long time. And that day took me a lot longer. Like it took me, so days 1 through 4 last time took me like 4 hours, and then day 5 took me 5 hours last time I played it. Like that's how long my YouTube videos are, because it's like the museum especially. So like I feel like the pacing for the encounters is really good the first half of the game, but the story not. There's too much story. But like when you're in the zoo and other places, like it doesn't feel like you're getting in all these encounters and having to retrace as much. And then later in the game, you're getting the encounter issue not being paced well, but there's really not as much story interrupting. So it's kind of weird. Like I just feel like the game didn't balance itself well enough in some of those aspects. But ultimately, like you said, I think the big thing is it's fun to play. Like the combat's fun, and that's really important. Difficulty and fairness. I mean, I think this game is a pretty easy game for the most part. There's a very unfair section or two that I'll let Chad talk about that I've experienced as well, to an extreme. But outside of, and I told him to cheat before the playthrough, and he kept being like, "What are you talking about?" And then he knew exactly what I was talking about. But it's probably even on a little on the easy side for the most part, wouldn't you say? The game?
I'd say the game's way too easy. I got to the final boss fight in, I think, 6 hours of gameplay total. Sure. And then I was there for a long time because the final boss fight ramps up quite a lot. First off, it's like 4 phases back to back, with no break in between. And then after you beat the final boss, there's an escape sequence where you have to run from the boss's final form. And it's clear to you that you're supposed to run from it. The game doesn't hide that piece of information. But there's a lot of little gotchas along the way. So it's an escape sequence.
Yeah.
So the very first one is that right after you finish the boss, you run back inside the ship that you're on, and you see the phone there. The phones are the save points throughout the game, and you see the phone right there, and you think, I just got done fighting 4 phases of boss. Yes, I'm going to save. But if you walk up to that phone, it just says that the phone isn't working while the boss is walking toward you. And he will catch you 100% if you walk up to that phone. So that's a real middle finger right there. And then when you finally realize, okay, I guess I can't do that, then you run inside the ship properly and try to make it to whatever the game's expecting you to go to. But there's forks in the road. There's different paths you can take, and some of them are dead ends. And if you take the wrong path, you will get caught. And I'll remind you that if you ever get caught, you die instantly, and you will go back to the beginning of the final boss fight, which is, again, 4 phases long and takes about 20 minutes, even once you've done it 6 times.
Not just the full boss fight, but also the cutscene before the full boss fight, which is like 3 minutes long. So it's like, and even I, knowing this was coming, I mean, I think I spent probably 2 hours doing that when I did it 4 years ago. It was a long time. I don't know. Go check my YouTube video. It's on there. You'll see all of the attempts of me doing it. It's probably a long time. But even me knowing that and being willing to look it up, I'm just like, I don't care. I'm pulling up Palmer's video. I'm gonna see which ways he goes. I'm gonna follow him. The first time, the menu was there was a dialogue box, and so I thought the game was paused. So that's when I started looking it up. Nope, the thing moves while that dialogue box is up. It is not paused, so I died there. So I had to redo
One of the times I got caught was because of that. There's no distinction, like visible distinction, between the cutscene and you gaining control again. And so the cutscene had ended, and there was the siren playing, and the boss was moving much more slowly and erratically. And I thought, okay, so this is sort of his death rattle. He's about to die. And so I just stood there watching him die, like you would when you know you're in a cutscene and you don't have control over your player. Turns out I had control the whole time, and I should have been running. I died, John. Okay. That's what happened to me.
So then the second time, like, the other thing that this stupid escape sequence does is it's like you're holding the wrong direction after you go through a transition. Like, it'll twist the camera around in certain ways so that, like, if you are still holding the direction you'd think you'd have to keep going, you end up walking back to the previous screen, which 100% you will get caught and die. And so, like, and I was using the analog stick, so even like accidentally knocking it a direction at the beginning of that scene, like, put me into like opening a hatch or something, which was not the right way to go, and I died. So
how'd that work for you?
I beat the game after some of those experiences. We call those growing experiences.
I think I ended up fighting the final boss 5 times, maybe 5 or 6 times. The first time I died was I was just being stupid. The thing said, hey, you should run from the final boss. And I said, I wonder what happens if you don't run. And I just walked over to him and I died instantly. And I was like, okay, that's what happens. But, you know, I'm a scientist. I have to know.
Yeah. How did it work out for me? I beat the game, and then I did literally give the middle finger to my television. Even knowing it was coming. So, yeah, the game's too easy outside of that section, basically. Is there anything else in the game that feels unfair? Like, isn't there... I feel like there's one other section that's kind of frustrating. Maybe it's just the museum, like, navigating it, but I don't know if it's, like, you're dying much. The Chrysler building, a whole nother discussion, but that kind of comes into replayability. The Chrysler building is really cool because it's a huge, 100 floor kind of 77 floor challenge that you can't even access till you do New Game Plus, till after you beat the game. And that's like the Dark Souls version of Parasite Eve, right? That's like, most people, I know Crazy said don't even try it unless you've beaten the game 3 times. So like you've boosted your stats over 3 playthroughs, because you can carry over your stats, your guns, all these different things. And so that's cool. That can provide you a challenge if you found the game too easy. And then also for replayability, there are a couple of hidden sections and hidden things you don't have to do. Specifically, the only one I can really think of is the warehouse. There's a warehouse section you can go. You can fight an additional boss and get some additional tools and weapons and upgrades to your stuff.
Every single area has hidden areas as well, like little secret places that you can get to if you're clever. And a lot of those are really cool. I was very thorough. I'm a very meticulous player in these sorts of games, and I found a lot of those secret areas, and I always found
Like
them
the
really
sewers,
rewarding.
you can do the whole grid and find there's a lot of items.
Yeah, there's a lot of
they're
cool
all-
stuff in there.
And it rewards you. Like that's the nice thing. It's not like you went out of your way to go like find this section. It gives you like a potion. Like generally, it's
Yeah.
giving you like a weapon, like a tool or a weapon, like +1 attack or plus something to beef your weapon up.
Yeah, like the sewers. I was in the sewers for a while and discovered at the end of it, oh, I could have gotten out of here almost instantly. And
for sure.
but going through the whole sewers, I ended up finding a way better armor than I had at
Yep.
the time. So
Yeah.
it was worth it.
Yeah, so I don't know if there's any like the warehouse is like an additional maybe 30 minutes of content. It's like
I
a
didn't play the
Prince.
warehouse in my playthrough.
Yeah,
I
I
think
did, and
a-
it didn't add much. I don't think it took more than 30 minutes for me.
I think a lot of people get some replayability out of the junk weapons. I don't think instinctively
that
that's
too,
something they do right off the bat.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Thanks for mentioning that. There's junk that you can pick up from some certain enemies throughout the game, and the game isn't super clear to you what you can do, but you know you can turn it into the officer at the PD's office, but it doesn't tell you what you'll get from it. But he needs like 300 pieces, is that right? And you can basically make a really cool gun. I want to do that, actually. I'm considering going back and doing that and maybe checking out the Chrysler building at some point, because those are two parts of the game I've never done. And I kind of wanted to do both of those in this playthrough, but everyone was like, you should just do it. You can't do Chrysler building on the first playthrough or even the second playthrough. So, but as you turn in the junk, you can get these really cool super guns, right? And there's a couple of different selections for them. So it's kind of the like special Pokemon of the game, right? Like you have your Ammonite and whatever you get, like it's that one thing where it's like I can get this one gun, but I've got to do a bunch of stuff. Get you
Right.
whatever. I can get my Mewtwo. You're if you're doing this much playing, like you're not gonna really need that gun to beat the game, right? Like the game's probably at that point, but it's cool. It adds a little bit of additional content, but ultimately, compared to other games of this era, like even Resident Evil, I think it's a pretty light amount of additional content. I don't know. What would you say?
What do you mean?
Like, do you think that this game is a little too linear, doesn't have replayability value, or what?
I mean,
replayability?
I think adding extra content for the New Game Plus experience, I guess, is nice. I mean, this is certainly more replayable than most things that we talk about, but yeah, I mean, it is particularly linear. It doesn't compare to a game like Final Fantasy VII, where you can go anywhere in the entire world anytime you want to, and you can really customize your playthrough. I mean, you're relatively limited in what sort of customizations you can have for each playthrough. So I would say that it's probably not all that replayable. I mean, I play it a second time, and you're only allowed to use your club. Good job. Like,
yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it would be fun to replay and also stuff, because I stuck with the pistol quite a bit, and the weapons do have a lot of different play values and the way they work in fights. But I would say this game doesn't necessarily have a shortage of content, but I think it's just the combination of the amount of content and the challenge. Like, I think this story and gameplay is probably pretty comparable to Resident Evil, actually, but Resident Evil is such a harder game that it feels longer. Like, it feels like more of an investment. There's also open exploration. It doesn't exactly hold your hand as to where to go. And so, ultimately, it has some replayability, and I think it's really cool to add the junk. I think it's really cool to add the Chrysler building, the warehouse, to have the New Game Plus, but it's pretty lacking. I feel like you're left wanting in that area, I think. So any last thoughts before we dive into comments and score? I mean, we could, for games like this, we talked about the story a lot. We should probably add story to the review, because it's a big part of an RPG, right? Like, is the story enjoyable or not? But
I think the story's pretty cool. I have comments I'm going to
covered
give with my story, or with my score, but
okay, go ahead and give your score then.
okay. So my score is not going to reflect whether or not I recommend you play this game. First off, I think that realistically this game is a 7 or an 8. It's actually a really solid game. It's a good game, but there's enough BS in it that I have to knock off whole points at this point. And I think really my score is going to be a 6. Now, that being said, I think that this is a good game that you should play. If you're listening to the score and you're using this information to decide whether or not you should try this game yourself, you've heard us talk about it and you say, well, should I play it or shouldn't I? I'm saying yes, you should play it. And knowing what we've told you about some of the BS in this game, it's going to be an 8 to you. But for me, it was a 6.
To be fair, I tried to tell you about that BS beforehand. You wanted the genuine experience, which I think is good.
I got the genuine experience, and it was BS.
but that was the first thing I'd said to you was, here's something you should do in the game to make this experience 10 times better. So, I'm not going to be as far off from you as you think. I think it's a 7 because it does have a decent amount of flaws in it. I mean, it's not a polished, perfect game. In my heart, I have more affinity for it than a 7 out of 10. But like an objective rating of like, how does this compare to other games from the era and on the system and from that genre, like it is definitely a very good game that I recommend. I think the combat is really fun. That's what stands out to me. It's really hard to have RPG games where the combat is fun. You know, you're Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, those kind of games, you know, Dragon Warrior games. I don't like the turn-based combat and I get bored with it, but this game I don't, and I think that's really cool. Ultimately, it could be deeper, it could have more of, you know, more content, it could be more challenging, and so I think those knocks go on it. I really like the story though. I like how kitschy it is. It's really kind of up my alley. I'm a B-movie kind of guy, so this just really has that nice blend of like a really well-produced, you know, constructed, silly bad movie at the same time. Like I just love that combo. But yeah, it's a 7 out of 10. In my heart it's like an 8 or a 9, but like objectively it's a 7. But yeah, it's similar to Simon's Quest, I feel like, in the one way that's like, if you can just warn somebody about 2 or 3 things in it, their experience is going to be 10 times better. Like, I think Simon's Quest is a good game because I played it with the walkthrough.
Sure.
It's a pretty good Castlevania game.
Yeah, you didn't get the experience. You didn't get the real experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I know,
Crazy Awesome in chat asked me, would it have been a 6 before day 6? And I told him it was a 7 before day 6, and it was an 8 before day 5, which I think really is the point here, is that this game is real good for so long, and then it ends on a relatively weak note. And I think that's the big flaw in this game.
And the bosses don't get challenging until literally the end of day 5 when you fight Eve in like coming down from the helicopter or whatever. Like everything up until then is too easy, and then the bosses like take a huge shot up for like the final boss is really hard and she's really hard. Yeah, it's a game without balance, but it's really cool, I think. And
how about you, Palmer?
It kind of ends weak.
Palmer, you get to tell us what your number is. It's going to be a 12 out of 10.
No. I'm actually the opposite end of the spectrum. So I would consider it a 5.5 or a 6, honestly.
Wow.
Wow.
Oh yeah, no. I told Auth here when he approached me, please be honest with your ratings, because I want to hear what you really have to say.
Wow, so I like the game the most.
Yeah, well, you know, maybe it's because
I'm upping it to a 7.5 then.
Oh,
I'm angry.
I think I've seen it too much. That's why. But if you don't mind, I'll touch on some of these categories really quick, just to kind of give myself an explanation. But the graphics I would consider a strong suit for the game. I mean, this game didn't come out too much later than Final Fantasy VII by the same people, and you both on the same console, you know, literally months apart. And you see like the huge leap in like just character models, character animations. It was advertised as a cinematic RPG. And a lot of those, you know, people still to this day come in here and say, you know, when I was a kid, this cutscene ruined me, you know, or like, you know, it terrified me. And so I like that about it. The music is obviously is really impeccable. Again, there's way too many screens with just footsteps. And it makes you, especially when you can't see, makes you insane. But look, you know, that's another story in and of itself. Controls and gameplay. So this game was actually made with the D-pad in mind, right? Analog came out at the exact same time that the game was being released. So instead of redoing the whole game to accommodate for, you know, that new style of movement, what they did is they basically made an on and off switch. So if you turned on analog, you lost your D-pad, and vice versa. So all the screens, the menus, all that stuff was kind of, you know, geared towards D-pad. That's what most of the people who speedrun it and things like that, I suggest to people that they use, because a lot of times, like you mentioned, one accidental tap and you're going back a screen, or you're, you know, running into, you know, something that you don't want, or getting caught by UB4 or whatever. And that is definitely their laziness in that definitely lost some points in that regard, because it really confuses some things.
Yeah, just to follow up, when you're trying to run in the game, we didn't say this before, and it's a really good point. If you're using the D-pad, you have to hold the circle button to run. If not, you have the slowest walking animation, like a completely worthless walking animation that would never be utilized for any purpose. It's not like Mario 64, where like, okay, well, maybe sometimes I want to walk slow. No, there's no reason that this should be turned off. At any time. It should just be automatically run and let me use the D-pad or analog stick. And the fact that it turns off the D-pad, it's such a pain, because you have to turn off the analog to do any of your tool menus, trying to like, you know, take items off or on something, you don't want to menu with an analog stick because it'll just shoot you 3 down, then 2 up. It's terrible. So that's a huge complaint.
And that's honestly first of all, the walking it's probably, and I don't know if people have played games with slower walking speed, but if you have, please let me know, because I think this is probably the slowest character movement in any game I've ever seen in my life.
Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, maybe.
It's garbage. It's so bad. Somebody thought it would be useful, and that's where honestly most of my points come off, because gameplay is actually like a strong suit, but it loses some of that valuable, like this gameplay could be taken up a notch if it was just easier, more ergonomical, easier to manage, things like that. And it suffers difficulty. Once you figure out most of the things, a lot of times I think the reason the difficulty was, not crazy hard is because the tool system is permanent, and they didn't want anybody to be like, oh, I messed up all my guns and now I can't finish. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think that especially in this era where saving at a certain spot and then being like, I can't progress because I don't have potions, I got to start the whole game over. Like that kind of thing was pretty common. So I think that's kind of why they teetered on the side of ease, and it makes it a little bit. But now you get to what you were mentioning, the escape scene and everything, and it blows because it doesn't matter how easy every single boss in the game is. As soon as you run right instead of left, it's over. And
right.
that gimmick is so. Like, and the music that goes along with it is infuriating, and the process of it gives me so much anxiety.
Yep.
And it sucks to go through all this, have such a clean, like every speedrun has lost a run there, and to be like, oh, this is a PB, and then accidentally hold up instead of down and go back a screen and it's over. That's already you lose. I understand what they were trying to do, but it's not cool. Like,
yeah, they should have done it.
At least the whole game is pretty much one direction.
It would
and then
have been
the only
fine
part that's not one direction is the part that matters.
If
yeah,
you
the
could
save
save
thing.
before it, like honestly, it would not be that big of okay, I made this save sequence 4 times before I solve it, fine. But the fact that you have to do the cutscene, then the final boss, then that, and they just didn't automatically let you save, like that just felt like the game producers just designers just being like, literally, I hate you.
It is so troll. I've watched every single casual player I watch, they die at that same spot. Because you can save at that phone before you go start the fights.
Yep.
And then when you run through that room a second time, it opens up a message that's like just long enough for no matter how fast you mash, you get caught. And it's absolutely on purpose. It's so troll.
Yeah.
And that takes some points off. A lot of my bigger complaints are like certain, like the way that they handle items in the game is a real turnoff to me. So if something poisons you, the only way to get poison curative items is to kill an enemy that has poisoning capability. So you're always going to be one fight behind, if that makes sense. So when you get to the bats and they blind you, until you beat those bats, you don't have a curative for blind.
Yep.
So like, and then the cures, they don't, they take up so much space. And you're already battling with inventory, and inventory is another, where I take the points off, and primarily because like, as you put points into inventory, if you care to, for your bonus points, you get diminishing returns. It's not 1 point is 1 inventory. Sometimes it's like 4 is an inventory. Then it's like 8 is an inventory, up to a max of 54 inventory slots total. So it's just, I think they tried to do the Resident Evil thing, and we're like, well, all we know is Final Fantasy. And it ended up being something in between, with like losing a few good qualities from one and the other. And,
I think the bats was also a section we didn't focus on enough, but that was real frustrating.
Oh, it's awful.
Really large beams. They have a very large hitbox or hurt box or whatever, and they're hard to avoid because this pre-rendered screen you're moving around, it's not exactly clear how to sidestep something in this game. Like, you're not sure you're going to dodge the attack. You're just hopeful. Like, okay, hopefully I'm between these 2 lines. And when they put this darkness on you, you miss every shot. It would have been nice if at least it was like, okay, now you miss half your shots or something, but no, you miss every shot. And so you have to just dodge back and forth until your ATB fills up, use an item, and then continue dodging until you get ATB again and get shots off, and not be standing still while one of those beams is coming to you while you're shooting. And it just ends up being this very frustrating back and forth until you really get the rhythm of it. But it didn't feel like it was like fun. Oh, I got better at the game and I'm avoiding it. It's like, okay, now I know how to talk.
I get hit by blind all the time.
Yeah.
All the time.
In defense,
I've played it so many times.
In defense of Darkness, though, it's merely tedious for a casual playthrough because all it takes is just running around for like 8 seconds for it to just wear off. So
that adds up when you want to
Yeah,
check every grid of the sewers, though.
It lasts 4 turns. Four. It's basically like 18 seconds, close to 20 seconds, something like that. And it doesn't stack, thankfully. But a lot of times you're like, oh, it's gone, and then you're getting hit with it again right as it.
Yep.
All right, I'll just I
You get
waste
one
my whole
bullet
day.
off and get hit by it.
And ammo is actually something you kind of have to be mindful of, depending on how your playthrough of the game is going, what weapons you're using. The things that like rate of fire, they don't really explain that rate of fire. The more bullets, the less damage, things like that. So you can easily trap yourself into thinking, "Oh my God, rocket launchers!" Obviously, and then you get steamrolled by everything.
They
so I think that
smartly do a really smart soft lock protection of every time you go to the gun person, you can get 30 ammo from the chest right there at the gun person. And that's kind of a nice, like, you need bullets to play the game, and you can't get yourself in a stuck situation. So that was smart, at least.
My only real complaint of those curatives was that the description on the curative says that it cures and prevents blah. It doesn't prevent
nothing.
It doesn't prevent anything.
No, not a chance.
No, because I definitely tried using one of those before fighting a poison enemy. I was like, I'm going to be smart this time. I'm just not going to get poisoned. I got poisoned literally right after using the item. I was very mad.
Yeah, and then my last thing that is a pretty big detractor of points as well is that 70% of the game is in the post game. And I feel like anytime you add a new game plus, it's kind of like a lazy developer situation. Maybe there's good thought to it, but it's like if the bonus content is to play the game again, then I feel like maybe but they were like, well, we'll give you this Chrysler building, but Chrysler building and new game are such opposite ends of the spectrum. In the Chrysler building will take you 3, 4, 5 times as long as the regular game will. So it's a shame that they tucked that away, plus some extra story content in something so impossibly difficult and something so time investing. Especially when the game as a whole is a relatively short RPG game. So that's about it for me, though. Those are my big. I've been sitting on those for 1.5 years, so
there you
it's
go.
good to get it all out.
So Palmer gives this a 5.5 or 6. Oth gives it a 6, and I give it a 7, maybe 7.5 because I'm angry at my. But you know what? That analog thing really pisses me off, so it's staying at a 7. Let's go ahead. Let's take a quick break, and then we can hear about speedrunning the game.
So as always, we want to break down the speedrun just a little bit, and this one's kind of a special one. We cover a lot of speed games that have a lot of, crazy tech, crazy glitches, and it's not very often that we get a chance to talk about RPGs. We did 2 back-to-back RPG episodes, however many years ago that was. But in general, we shy away from RPGs because it can sometimes be hard to like quantify what makes the speedruns cool. A lot of it is neat routing decisions, the ability to operate, make clever choices on the fly, things like that. So it can be a little bit hard to quantify in this context, but we're gonna do our best. And to start off with, let's talk a little bit about the categories that you can find in Parasite Eve. So the 3 categories that we're going to be talking about are New Game plus Normal Ending, and then New Game plus Chrysler Building. So those are the 3 main categories that you'll see if you take a look at the speedrun.com leaderboards. And the world record for New Game is by our friend Professor Palmer here. He has a 2-hour, 54-minute, and 36-second run. Second place is Primus with a 2-hour, 57 run, and Plywood has a 2-hour, 59-minute run. And then there's the New Game Plus Normal Ending. So New Game Plus, as we mentioned before, New Game Plus sort of lets you carry over all of your stats and items. And so you're going into it much higher powered than you should be. Much more high powered than you should be. And Palmer has a 2-hour, 23-minute, and 8-second run in that category. Crazy Awesome in second place with a 2-hour, 24-minute run.
I have a question about that category real quick. So
yeah,
when you're using the save files for that, like, are you maxed out on everything, or does every single playthrough get better and we haven't hit that pinnacle of like?
No, it's pretty much expected that you only run and submit your time if you are 100% maxed. Crazy Awesome was nice enough to build an amazing save file with pretty much the best of everything you can imagine: stats, armor, gun. With a gun that has just roids worth of stats. One shots everything, hits all enemies, that kind of stuff. So it's pretty much the pinnacle. Time save in that is, movement, RNG, and fights and things. And he made that same save file available to the community. So everybody at least has that opportunity to.
Sure, you don't want to make every runner have to play through the game 25 times.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah, so that's very nice of him to allow you to take the world record from him with his own file. And
just to clarify, 17 runs. Took him 17 playthroughs to get to where that save file is. So shouts to him, amazing guy.
He knows so much about mitochondria now, though.
Crazy Awesome's real fast at the game, though. It probably only took him a weekend to beat the game 17 times. So
what's nice is now he actually legally has an associate's in biology, which is really surprising. I didn't know that was, but if you beat the game enough, that happens. Which is
he's actually the lead pharmacist at Walgreens now. They caught his Twitch stream one of these days, and boom, there it was.
And just printed a degree straight out of his PlayStation. And then the last category is New Game plus Chrysler Building. So we talked a little bit about what the Chrysler Building is. It's 77 floors, you said. And the way the Chrysler Building works is as you progress through it, you get keys to access different level floors. And so the New Game plus Chrysler Building category basically goes in with that already maxed out stats. And it pulls their key out of the inventory for like it's the level 5 key, so it gets you to like the last 10 floors or something like that.
Yeah, level 7 key takes you to floor 70. You run up 7 staircases. That's all you do, and then you immediately fight.
Okay.
So you don't do the whole Chrysler Building?
Oh no. But he had to have done the whole Chrysler Building in a playthrough in order to set up that file. So again,
But the file only goes through floors 70 through 77, essentially.
Exactly. Yes. Exactly.
Right. Why not do one with the whole Chrysler Building?
I have. I have.
How long was
it? I did it was 19 hours and 45 minutes.
So that's like a long time.
Yeah. I did the New Game run. It was 100% basically an incentive for a marathon, and I did the New Game run with all bosses. So I did the warehouse bosses, extra bosses you don't usually see. Then it took me 2 more New Game Plus runs in from the same file. Then I worked my way up the Chrysler Building. The issue with the Chrysler Building is you can't save anywhere in there. The fights are very hard, and every floor is randomized. Every 1 through 9 randomized, and then 11 through 19 randomized, and so on and so on.
The segments,
You get a key for every 10 floors. So the only thing you can do is then ride the elevator back to the bottom, go to the police station, save, return back to floor 10, and do it all over again.
It's really nice to design it that way. of them.
Oh yeah. Oh dude. Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
I
don't
died
put a
so
phone
many
at
times.
the front of the building. Maybe it could
Yeah.
just be a payphone in the front of the building. You know, people are
should
gonna
have.
want to save here.
They should have had the Stingray chase you up the Chrysler Building. You know. I mean,
Yeah, why not at this point? God, Square, what were you thinking with some of these decisions? I'm so confused.
So this category is very short, as you can see. Palmer has a world record of 22 minutes and 58 seconds, which was actually set just the other day. I noticed the run pop up on the world records list on the front of speedrun.com shortly after finishing my casual playthrough, and I was like, I wonder where I got the idea to play some Parasite Eve that day. And Crazy Awesome has a 23-minute and 3-second run, so a very small gap there, 5 seconds between the two of them.
One interesting thing to note just before we move into the tech and stuff is that a lot of the best runs, or all of the best runs, are run on PSP actually. So this game actually runs faster on PSP, or technically through PlayStation TV, correct?
yes. Yeah. Because fastest speed works on the digital download for some reason, and that's the reasoning. That's the loads are significantly faster with the.
So let's say someone's listening to this and wants to speedrun Parasite Eve. What would they need to buy to do it the fastest they can?
To do the fastest, absolute fastest, a PSP 3000 or a PS TV are going to be the best options. The PlayStation 2, regardless of model, is about 2 minutes in a vacuum slower. And then PS3, or I'm sorry, PS1 and emulator are a couple minutes behind that. And then PS3 dead last.
And a PS TV, you need a Vita or a PSP to play through it? Is that correct?
No. PS TV, PS3 or PS4 controller hooks into it, and you download the game like it would a PS3 or PSP.
And so it's still like available to download.
Oh yeah, $5 for Parasite Eve. So
okay, so you're gonna have to drop some money on it.
A bargain at any price.
Yeah, so I just think that's interesting to note. It's kind of, one of those weird situations where you have to speedrun the game, on a system that it really wasn't like initially released.
Oh yeah,
kind of a strange situation, but that does happen, and the leaderboard is not divided. But once I start running it,
there it is. I mean,
I'm gonna be like Carcinogen, my man. Let's get a PS2 leaderboard going.
We've had long-standing conversations about splitting the boards. I think if the game became more popular, it would absolutely be something that happened.
It's nice and clean that it only has 3 categories on your board. Like, I thought this was going to be one of those games with 20 different categories.
That's because I'm not a mod.
Yeah,
they won't mod me because I keep making up meme categories.
Yeah.
The 100% all bosses, club percent. They're like, no.
Yeah, they know better. They know what dangers lurk from modding you. So we don't really have any glitches to speak of. Really what makes this game most interesting is sort of just the technique that goes into it, being able to respond to the different outcomes that you might run into. So do you want to talk a little bit about how the randomness actually works in this game, especially as it applies to like what weapons you find throughout your run?
Yeah, so we'll start at the beginning. Every chest in the game is random to a degree. The vast majority are 80%, 20%.
Okay.
Like you'll get a medicine 80% of the time, or a tool, and things like that. The big chest in the game is the gun chest in the hospital. It's 50-50. There are some that are 99-1, where the tool is a super tool. Fortunately enough, in the route, the 80% ones are the ones we want. So I don't think at a single point besides the 50-50 are we, hoping to get one specific thing out of there and not seeing it more often. So that's at least fortunate in that regard. And we also don't have any reset points, even if you get really bad RNG on the chest. So that makes the run at least a little bit more tolerable, especially for like the entry level. But the weapons, pretty much as fast as you can. You start off with pistols. A low rate of fire. We use the club for almost all of day one. And
wait,
then,
do you save before some of these chests and reset?
No, not anymore.
Save point? Okay.
You can't save anyway, John, because of the fact that if you save in the middle of a day, you don't get the big bonus. Do you actually take advantage of that? Someone was telling me during my playthrough that if you don't save during the day, you just save at the top of the day, that there's some bonus you get in points at the end of the day.
That's in the New Game Plus.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that's available in regular New Game.
Okay.
Crazy Awesome is a more expert on New Game Plus, but I think that's how it works.
Okay.
I don't think it matters at all in the regular. We used to save when I started running the game. There was a reset point if you didn't get the preferred gun in the hospital, which is dead smack in the middle of the run.
Mm-hmm.
So you would save right at the phone, open the chest. If you didn't get it, do the soft reset. and then try it again. Fortunately, Primus, who did an incredible job with changing a lot of the route to make it more runner friendly and faster, he got rid of that, and by getting rid of that and creating the backup strats, it led us to figure out an even faster regular strat. But it all comes down to the guns, and you'll see us use the club, and then a pistol at the very end of day 1. We switch to the assault rifle for day 2, and then as soon as we have the very first machine gun available to us in day 3, we use machine guns all the way to the end when we switch back to a handgun for the final day. But the reason that the machine guns is such a big deal is because they're the fastest ATB, they're the fastest reload animation, and they're the fastest, and they have random, which is a very unique and very important stat that a gun can have. The way that it works is it's a rate of fire 2. So you get 2 bullets. When you have rate of fire 2, each one does 66% damage as opposed to 1 at 100. Whereas you can see with rate of fire 3, you drop all the way down to like 50, I think, and then so on and so forth. But the random bullet is completely unpenalized by damage. So you have the rate of fire 2 at 66, 66, and that random bullet, which fires very, very frequently, does 100%. So you're effectively getting a rate of fire 3 with a better damage number but at the cost of not being able to target. You just mash and it targets what it wants.
Sure.
Fortunately, most of the fights are in a confined enough space where if you stand in a smart enough spot that you're going to hit everything regardless of what it decides to shoot at. But it also completely gets rid of I've hit that guy twice. I think if I shoot 1 bullet at him, I can then shoot the other 2 at this guy, and that slow kind of thinking and all that, it removes that, which, in turn speeds up the fights in general.
Sure.
So those are the small kind of like, as far as the guns and routes are concerned, those are the things we focused on.
Who determined like what guns would be best, or like did this come from the task, or did somebody sit down and kind of plug through the stats and mathematically figure out this is going to deal the most damage over time? I mean, what made you decide to go, pistol, the rifle, the machine gun?
Well, there was the task that was created was very good, and it was created before anybody actually did runs. I think the first Speed Demo Archives posts were actually inspired by the task being uploaded to YouTube, and it was impressive. Turbo Dog, Pewexel, and Dream Bomb, a French runner, they kind of took turns, coming up with a route at the time, and trying different things. And it was just figured based on a lot of guns have certain stats or like empty slots. So knowing like at the end of the game what you needed and being like, well, this is one of the only guns that can even equip all that. I think that cut out a lot of the guessing. Also, you only have pistols available to you in day 1, and then on day 2 you only have pistols and the assault rifle, and it comes down to this gun shoots fast and it does 40. This gun shoots slower but it does 60. The math was done on that by the creator of the task, so he did a lot of the hard work, and it was just small optimizations from that point.
Oh, okay, cool.
It also makes sense too because even if you're not sort of taking that time to like count enemies and say, this guy's taking this much damage and this guy's taking that much, you run into a lot of situations when you play casually where you'll sink all of your bullets into one target, and if they die, it doesn't redirect them. You just don't do any more actions for that turn. So having those random, while it might be a little more chaotic, it also means that you can guarantee that every one of your bullets will go somewhere.
Kind of. If it kills an enemy before that random bullet comes out, it'll stop your turn.
Okay.
But basically it still works in a, more often than not, like that happens. So it definitely speeds up as a whole, the lump sum of fights by a lot. And like you're saying, a lot of people you'll watch and they'll fight and just mash X and shoot 9 bullets into an enemy that needs 2 or whatever. That's a extreme example, but it's and also ammo count. In the run we use a very specific amount of ammo, and depending on how many repeating counters, which are another big thing, we can sometimes be above or below that, and you have to be kind of intelligent about where you get your ammo from and things like that.
Yeah, it also makes sense that you probably would go with certain weapons just based on the fact that you would have to go additional screens to go find certain weapons and do. I mean, ultimately over time, none of the weapons are going to do so much damage and save so much combat time that you're going to go way out of your way to get them, right?
Exactly.
I mean, most of them are on the path.
Yeah, actually, there's only the shotgun that we rip the effect from at the end of the game, and that's it. I think that's it. That's the only one that we don't go through story screens in order to obtain.
Right.
And how you pull off the basically the shotgun ability of it and make the pistol have a shotgun spread, right? Can you explain that?
Exactly. Yeah, so at the very end, it used to be the micro Uzi. You would pull the burst off of the shotgun, and you would pull the enter 2 commands off of the M8000, the gun that the T-Rex gives you, and you would basically make your machine gun, be able to fire multiple turns. You basically get 2 turns to every one, and have the shotgun effect, so it hits all the enemies in a cone. So you kind of have to angle yourself a certain direction. But the next Eve fight, at the very end of day 5, she has 3 body parts. So when you shoot at her, you're damaging all 3, and you usually will kill them all, within a turn or 2 of each other. So it removes that having to individually eat away at them. Now we use the M8000 instead of the micro Uzi due to some route adjustments. But similar thing, it's a handgun that fires 2 bullets. Each bullet does like 180 damage. It's ridiculous. And it will hit multiple enemies. So you can like stand on one side, line everything up, and just like mow it down. It's really brilliant.
Yeah, that seems like an unintended effect, maybe. I don't know for sure, but that was a really cool ability that the weapons had too. Like the one that gives you an extra turn has to be pretty useful.
Oh yeah.
The speed run, right? That's what I kept to the end because then you could go ahead and shoot and heal on the same.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can use 2 items. You can heal 1 turn. A lot of what we do is we shoot with our first turn, and then we heal or liberate with that second turn. So it's just pushing a little bit more extra damage with each turn and things like that.
That makes sense. So in addition to that, anyone who's really played this game, especially if you've wandered your way around the museum entirely lost for a long time, knows that the encounters aren't random in this game. They're specific locations. And while, for whatever reason that I'm sure Palmer will explain in great detail, they don't always trigger every single time you walk into those zones, they are in fixed locations with some preset types of configuration. So how does that really figure into the speedrun?
It's... at an entry level, it doesn't affect you too much. I mean, it is just, you're just losing time. But once you get to a spot where you're grinding for PBs, depending on the RNG of repeat encounters, it can definitely cause you to, oh, this is too many, or I didn't get the correct ones. And the way that they work is certain screens will always have 100%, this screen's going to have an encounter. Now you will, go into a door on that screen, to another one, do whatever. When you return to that same screen with that guaranteed encounter, you have then a halved chance to get it. So if I walk through a screen once, I'm guaranteed 100% I'm going to get it. If I go through that same screen again, it drops to 50. If I go through that same screen a third time, it drops to 25. So I think it actually hits a minimum 10% or something like that. But a lot of people said that they potentially did that to avoid people being able to grind themselves to a higher level. You take the fight that's, story, we're going to give you this fight no matter what, but it removes your ability to just run from one screen and then come back and keep doing that to farm up, ammo, to farm up medicine, to farm up EXP.
It's really smart, and I like that a lot because I'm the kind of person who will just grind the crap out of a game early on, and then it'll just make it not fun, but I know I should do it. Like Final Fantasy VII or something, if you grind for a good hour, 2 hours in the right spot early in the game, it's like the whole rest of the game ends up being a breeze. So, I mean, this game is a little easy, but it's nice that you can't just be like, okay, I'm dealing 190 damage my first playthrough, on day 3.
Yeah, day 3, yeah.
Now I'm killing everything. I'm killing.
It's a new game plus run all of a sudden,
Yeah.
Yeah, and thankfully for the speedrun, I don't like speedruns that grind. I run a couple, but like you said, there's usually you find that one abusable that gives you the most advantages. In this case, you can't really get away with something like that. It does play a factor in late game EXP though, and the reason for that is at the very end of the game when we go into day 6, the bosses Eve, the last boss in day 5, and all of the bosses in day 6 that give no experience points because they don't have a finished battle screen. If you notice when you beat them, it immediately will transition into the end of day or to the next phase of that boss fight, and then the chase sequence. So the last opportunity you have to get is before you step out of that door in the museum and enter that point of no return. Now, we need to be level 33 by the end of the run, which requires a certain amount of those repeat encounters through the course of the run. I believe there's 16 screens that we have repeat encounter chances. 15 of them we go through twice. And so there's 16 total. One screen we go through 3 times. The rest we only go through twice. So, that's that repeat chance. But we need to be level 33 to have Liberate, which is an incredibly powerful move. It does about 1,750 damage. With just one use, requires full Parasite energy charge to utilize, but it makes a lot of those. This is an in-game boss. Not only does it do a ton of damage to them, but one of the more important aspects of it is that it completely stops. What happens in a cutscene essentially. So everything is frozen. You can't take damage. If the enemy is about to use a super powerful attack and you're not, movement is very important. If you're not close enough to, like UB3, you have to kind of run under. He jumps to a corner and you got to get underneath him. If you're too far away and you can't reach him, you can just Liberate and completely stop that ability, deal the damage you might need to deal. It saves about a minute and a half as opposed to non-Liberate. So there is this kind of perfect blend of, I need repeat encounters, but where do I want them? And most of the time we found that we want, 4 or 5 in the museum where they're worth the most EXP and you're strong enough to kill them in a pretty quick period of time, as opposed to the 2 in the NYPD or the 4 in the hospital. Those ones are a bit slower, and what they give you is like, because at the end of the game, it's, it pales in comparison to the amount of EXP you're needing and you're gaining from those fights.
That makes sense.
So that can be a big factor, right? Like while you're going through a run, which encounters have I gotten, which have I not? Is that like a point where you just like have to reset at a certain point, or? Yeah,
I definitely reset over. It's the luxury of like, it'll never be so bad that you won't be able to finish a marathon run. But once you get your PB to, I consider like maybe even a sub 3, or maybe a little lower than that, but in that range, like you can absolutely reset over it. Because there's some fights that if you get, it's like, I'm sure that you guys noticed, there's some fights that took 2 minutes and there's some that took 20 seconds in the same zone, just because there's 4 enemies and one of them slows you, or there's 2 and they're both, just little poison guys or whatever that are super easy to dodge. So the amount and the makeup of them is a pretty big deal.
But it's never faster to run from them. I mean, I didn't realize during my playthrough you run at all. But like, is it just not a very effective thing? Does it normally say like, oh, you can't run, or what? Why?
Yeah. So
most RPGs you run from everything, right? So
yeah, exactly. Well, aside from the fact that you need to be a certain level, and you won't know you're going to be that level until like it's the very last encounter is already done. So unless you know the math of each encounter, it's hard to weigh that out. But to make it all easy, your runaway chance is like probably less than 10% in this game, and it takes a whole turn. So it's garbage. I've never been able to successfully run away from something in a run, and I've tried a few times.
So technically, shouldn't a task be able to run from every fight and somehow like just dodge the boss's every move and do
a lot of them are like
damage? Or I mean, I don't like, you'd think in an extreme sense, right? If it's possible to run from fights, most RPGs you run from everything that you can.
I think that's why they like tucked it away or something, because it is such a janky command.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, it's like a worm. Like, you tell me I can't run from that? I beg to differ. There's like a bush that you fight in Central Park. I'm like, there's no way he's catching me, man.
For perspective, Chad didn't find out it existed till day 6. I've beaten the game twice. I didn't know it existed at all. And then Palmer speedran the game for a year and did. So
yeah, they
really don't highlight it in the menu very clearly.
I'm very astute. I discovered it the fastest.
You did, and that was like 10 hours into gameplay too.
It is and it doesn't not work well at all. So I absolutely tell people that you're better off taking the encounter the amount of time.
There's also some notable boss fights in this game. So there's a lot of bosses throughout the game. We're not going to talk about every single one of them, but you had 2 that you specifically pointed out. Centipede has a specific strategy or tech that goes into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Centipede it's one of those bosses that a lot of people, especially learn in the run. There is a way where you can kind of min-max it a little bit and deal with. The biggest issue with Centipede, and this is with the route we run now, it used to be a lot easier because they would equip the burst from the shotgun to their machine gun in the sewers because there's a shotgun available there, and that would get rid of that random targeting and also the random bullet. But that was what it was worth to them. And the issue with Centipede is he has two phases. Now, his first phase, you have to just push damage into him. He's an entire whole centipede. He has a poison attack as well as a blind and like just a straight physical damage lunge. And the best way to do it is to do damage on the first turn, cast haste, and then kind of like do damage as you run around in a circle so that you can avoid his attacks. Well, when you do that, he will eventually take a certain amount of damage. He'll like do this little spinning animation, and they'll split into fourths. So there's 4 of them. They each jump to a corner of the screen. Now, if you time right as he's splitting, and because of the way the game is, like if there's not a target on the screen, you can hit X, and it'll like pause and say no target. So you can actually just stagger back and forth if you're really worried about timing it correctly, and you'll always get it. But when he splits, even with random targeting, your gun will only target one of those pieces. Only one piece of centipede until they've all landed is actually targetable by a weapon, regardless of anything. Just that's how the hitbox works. It's not actually 4 hitboxes until they've reached their positions they're going to land at. So with random,
and then there's this whole
exactly. But the one piece that's available to be hit is one of the body pieces, which are the weakest. So you'll kill it actually in its animation. So immediately you're down to 3, if you time that correctly. And then you'll have full parasite energy. You energy shot the other body piece, and within your first turn of him splitting, you're down to 2. And it's a lot easier because they move from corner to corner. They do a ton of damage. So you can, and if you stand directly in the middle, you don't hit all 4 of them like you would think, right?
Yeah,
you have to stand
can't quite reach.
either closer to. You have to stand closer to 2. You have to commit and just hope.
And the fight encourages you to stay away from them because as they sort of move around during the fight, they also lunge at you, and so you're like encouraged to stay in the middle, but then you can't target them.
They're also snapping their fingers like this, which I thought
was
weird. It felt
they're strange.
Very intimidating.
And I guess one thing.
Can you clarify what you mean by min-max, just in case somebody doesn't know?
Yeah, so you can, there is an absolute fastest, but, in this game, you have the luxury of no matter, at the cost of only time, you can make it through anything. Because if you're willing to sacrifice, I won't haste or I won't energy shot, I'll make this fight a little bit longer, you will always be able to heal yourself. If they're parasite energy, it works a very specific way that I know a lot of people don't catch on to. Until they're frustrated with why is it recharging so slow all of a sudden. Yeah,
please tell me, Palmer, why it recharges so slowly sometimes.
So you can heal yourself. The way that it works is the more parasite energy you drain in a single fight, the slower it recharges. So especially if you've used energy shot or liberate or something like that, as soon as it goes all the way down to 0, it's going to take a lot longer to recharge. Whereas if you heal 1, you're using less, it sets it back less far. Basically, the recharge rate diminishes every time you utilize some of that magic. So you can't effectively sit in a fight and heal yourself forever, but you can in a lot of fights, if there's one enemy left and he doesn't do anything, run around until your meter is charged and then run into the next one. Now, there is one glitch in the game that does exist that I utilize in my 100% run, whereas if you switch armor, it resets that recharge rate back to 100%.
Oh. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is neat. We don't utilize it in the run just because it costs a turn to switch armor, and most of the time we shouldn't be using it besides the full-on energy shot, full-on liberate. But the min-max of Centipede is one of those situations where it's like, I know this fight is difficult, and I know he does a lot of damage, but I can, pretty much at any point just forfeit a turn at the sake of some time and use a medicine or use a heal. And you can struggle your way through most anything. Doing it fast is going to require the most risk. Just doing it is going to still be an option, though, and that's kind of
like life. You can struggle your way through anything.
Yeah, exactly.
The Parasite Eve story.
I do want to say one last thing is that it was really amazing that with a 3-hour speedrun, it managed to line up in this episode perfectly that while you were talking about Centipede, the Centipede fight was playing on the video. There's just no other way for that to happen. It's not that long of a fight, and it's a 3-hour video. The timing was amazing.
That's funny. What about 121 Worms? This is the other boss that you thought were known for.
Yeah. So 121 Worms is it's really, really technical. I'll save you guys the obvious, movement by movement instructions, but the way that 121 Worms works is if anybody's familiar with the fight, there's 4 worms that appear right off the bat as soon as you step into the snow square that they appear in Central Park. And, excuse me, when one worm of those 4 dies, the other remaining worms then gain HP and size, and they do a little bit more damage with each growth level. So you can whittle away one worm, another worm, another worm, and then eventually the final worm is obviously the biggest, has the most HP, does the most amount of damage. You like never want to see that guy. He is scary. Does a lot of damage. He's kind of hard to dodge. But what the route used to call for, and is considered the traditional route, definitely the most common this day and age, by far the easiest, is you would start with, you kill 2 worms, you ignore the other 2, and then you with each turn you have 2 bullets. You shoot both in the same turn, so that the hopes that your damage lines up and you kill 2 in a single turn, avoiding that final evolution essentially of the final worm. But 121, what it does is it utilizing certain movements, and the fight was believed to be random, but after some testing, I figured out that it's based on the very first worm that takes damage. You're going to get a preset pattern, 2 variations to it, and 121 worms is possible as long as you damage that correct worm, get one of the preset patterns, and have the timing down to, you got maybe a half second to a second of error in the whole minute and 21 second fight. And the reason that fight is called 121 is because it will always, no matter how poorly or well you do it, if it gets done, it's going to be in a minute and 21 seconds as opposed to the minute and 50, minute and 45 that the traditional route takes. And it is crazy difficult. You kill 3 in a single turn as opposed to 2, which even Task couldn't do it any faster because the 4th worm is just so far away. There's no way that you could, a single ATB won't even get you, that much value out of it. And I think that I've done, since the strat got discovered, I think that was around like my 400 runs point, maybe a little less. I'm up to probably over 1,000 runs now. I think I've done it 4 or 5 times ever. It's crazy difficult. It's early on, so that time save is super, super hard to come by. And it's really like I get, my heart goes a million miles an hour. And it's not even possible if you don't even have good enough ATB when you start. So, someone like me who has to reset over it, most of my runs, end right before worms even get there. So
you actually do reset if you don't get the 1-to-1.
Yeah, now that my PB,
the world record?
Yeah, it is. So now that my PB has it, it's really, really, really hard to say, well, I can make this up. Yeah, it's a game that's already trimmed down to, just, enter like 120 worms is so specific that you actually have to reload a specific amount of bullets so that when you kill 1 worm, you'll reload in the process of one coming up so that you don't shoot 1 bullet and shoot at nothing because it's not there yet. So it comes down to your reload animation timing. It's super specific.
Yeah, because
really
their hitboxes aren't like the worm will be partly visible on the screen, but the hitbox not visible.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can shoot at the dirt. Absolutely. When they've already returned back to the earth, a lot of times you'll miss.
Well, I'll have you know that I shot at a lot of dirt during that fight.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Everybody, and people come to me and they're like, why is this fight so hard? And you can actually kind of see the transition of like somebody who's grinded those and once you figure out a lot of those strats in this game for the bosses, it's just a rinse and repeat timing. You get familiar with it. Movement, because it is something that exists in fights, you can optimize, like, if I move this way, he moves this way kind of thing, and pretty much lean on that always. And then Shiva becomes everybody's worst enemy just because she works in a specific way that there's not really in a good fashion. And that's the only boss we don't have like a do this every time. It's going to be good. It's going to be fine. But Worms and Centipede are definitely the starting point horror shows that most people come to me about.
Awesome. Well, that's a lot of really cool speedrun stuff. Honestly, I feel like the speedrun has a lot to it that are unique compared to most games we've talked about, which I think is really fun. And I really enjoy kind of hearing how this game's been routed since I've played it for so long. But let's go ahead and take a quick break, and then we're actually going to answer some of your Q&A. as we said previously, we are live right now on twitch.tv/theframesavers here, able to answer your live Q&A. And also, we had a lot of questions this week on our Discord. So thank you all so much for hopping in. We create a new channel every week, you know, a couple weeks ahead of time with the episodes coming up, and you can ask Q&A anytime. And so we got a good amount of questions for this. Everybody's got Parasite Eve fever. They're stoked. They're excited about this game. And so there's a lot of questions. So first question.
Wouldn't it be Parasite Eve parasites?
Ooh.
Bacteria? What causes a fever? Bacteria?
That's what's wrong with me, is I have a parasite.
There you go. I don't know. But this is something we want to talk about in the speedrun discussion. But Omega Number asks, blindfolded Parasite Eve, how? So you have played this game blindfolded?
Yeah, I've beaten it twice blindfolded. We've done a ton of runs, but we have it figured out now. Or, I mean, the way that the inventory sorts itself can be adjusted. Well, like, there's 3 versions of sorting your inventory. It's like weapons or medicine or whatever first. And I was able to figure out exactly like where offense is, defense is, junk, and all that stuff, where it positions itself in relation to everything else. And that's the biggest factor, is like knowing that you have what you need in your inventory for gun equips later on, for, you know, medicine or the gear that you might need, things like that. But another big thing is, outside of that, sound is directional. So they did a good job in that. If you listen to the game, as long as it's on stereo, made that mistake before. As long as it's on stereo, you can actually, if I run from the top right corner to the bottom left, I will hear Aya's footsteps with my eyes closed move. And as long as you can see the screen in your head, you know exactly where you are as you hear her footsteps, you know, traverse across the screen. Some of the boss fights become a little bit harder. Obviously, T-Rex, because
do you think that's from being blindfolded?
So yeah, it's crazy when you can't see.
It seems like when you play video games using your eyeballs.
How many blindfolded 121 worms have you gotten?
0.
Oh, okay.
But I got really close to the last one.
What was your blindfolded time?
4.5 hours.
I mean, that's better than I beat it blind.
Yeah, it's respectable. An hour of that, counting and recounting menus and figuring out what items are where, just so that I can be absolutely sure, because items and inventory, especially with Meta's annoying charms, they make a big difference. Contact damage running into enemies helps me know where I'm at on the screen as well. So
please tell me what those charms do. Do they do anything? Am I allowed to throw them away?
So the ones that you're able to deposit in the NYPD, those are the earlier charms he gives you. Those don't do anything. The ones that you cannot deposit at the end of the game, those are actually placeholders for Meta's gun that you receive from the Daniel cutscene.
Oh, that's right. That's really clever.
They're actually placeholders for certain things, as well as they're placeholders for the New Game Plus when you carry over your stuff, so that it won't, you know, be an inventory that's already taken up, kind of thing.
That makes sense.
That's really cool. Follow-up question: how do you feel like this reflects on you as a person? That was asked by Anonymous. I don't know who it was.
How do I feel?
That this blindfolded run that you like looking when you're 80 years old, looking back on your life, and you just look back at your youth, you think you're gonna be like, that was a good decision?
Well, I'll save you guys the dramatics and the life story, but Parasite Eve, speedrunning as a whole, and Parasite Eve was the first game I really speedran. So I obviously had an attachment to it as I saw myself get better. I was hooked. But I was also at a time in my life when I was like struggling with work, and I was like in a weird relationship place, and it was like my solace. Like I would come to Parasite Eve and I grinded it out. And I saw results, and I loved it. And you know, somebody said, you've played this so many times, why don't you do it blindfolded? And once I put my blindfold on and made it like way farther than I thought, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing.
We're doing it.
And sad and everything that I live for. So
I'm proud of
I am pleased. Most people, I've done a lot of other games, a lot of other, you know, arguably better games, but people still come back to Parasite Eve. And you know what? Like, I'm perfectly happy with being the Parasite Eve guy. I love the game, and it is.
Well, better games, you say it's a 5.5, so there's a lot of better games.
Yeah, there's a lot of worse games too, though. Let me get me started on that.
Next question's from Andy J. Retro. He asks, how do you learn a long RPG run versus shorter platform game? What are the biggest challenges in running multiple hour RPGs? And in here, we could probably just plug like kind of where you can go to learn about this game specifically too, like
yeah. So
guides.
I found that a lot of people, they run one or the other. There's not a lot of people that just are like, you know what, I feel like running Mario today. See the next. You know, and those people, I'm sure they exist, but usually in the RPG speedrunning community, everybody runs, RPGs. It's just it depends a lot on what you were grown up, raised with. I was raised with RPGs. PS1 was my first console kind of thing. It's what I'm familiar with. As far as learning an RPG, I don't think it's any, obviously the process and the inputs and the things like that are different, but it's still just, I learned Parasite Eve a day at a time, like a game day at a time. And I was like, okay, learn this, watch somebody better than me, read the notes that are available, and then try to emulate. And over time, just do it better and better as you continue. And I feel like no matter what game you're learning, that process of watch someone better, learn to the better strats, and as you are more comfortable, just, work those things into your route. A lot of people, the bathroom thing is no joke. For RPGs, I run a couple 10-hour plus games. I run some shorter than 3. Figuring out like what your body is comfortable with and not being ashamed to take a 30-second time loss. Those things are the endurance is a very big factor. Outside of that, it's just a run. If you enjoy it, you're gonna sit through it. You're not even gonna realize that, oh my God, it's midnight already. And that's what I love about it. But for this game specifically, Primus, as I mentioned previously, did an incredible job of rerouting what TurboDog and some others before him did. And not just that, but he has, I say this all the time, probably the most detailed, easy to learn notes in any speed game ever. It comes down from the line of text, it literally says, hold left here, hold right here on this screen, input this twice. It breaks it down to the absolute bare minimum for anybody. You can find that on our speedrun.com/guides, speedrun.com/PE/guides. There's also a video tutorial that I made that work along with the notes if, visual is more preferred as a text. And with those 2 resources, and Plywood even made a simplified movement guide. With all those resources available, you can learn the run of the day and do a run before the end of the day. It's super easy to pick up, has some incentive to get better at, but really, really simple.
Like you said, it sounds like a good fit for the 12-hour challenge.
Absolutely.
And shout outs to all those people that contributed to that. It takes a village to make a speed run, so it's really cool to have people like Crazy making the save files, people making these guides. They definitely deserve to have their name shouted out. Next quick question. Fighting Feng Huang asks, candy corn, yay or nay? This is a hotly debated subject around this time.
It is really very much yay. I could eat pounds of candy corn.
Love candy corn.
I could eat pounds of it, man.
We are very different. Most people hate candy corn. I've realized.
Really?
I had no idea.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
I didn't know that either.
I'm very pro candy corn. You can eat enough of it that it starts to taste gross, but it's good. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it'll just taste like just sugar granules, but you still go. You just don't stop.
You push through it. You're taking it running.
You have to fight through that feeling.
Yeah.
Someone who's willing to beat Parasite Eve blindfolded, to push through the pain of when the candy corn's tasting bad. I also always thought it would be interesting to make a candy corn on the cob. Nobody steal that idea from me.
Well, actually, it's funny you mention it. If you stack candy corn kernel by kernel on itself and like where they fit into each other, it actually makes a full corn of the cob. That's why it's called candy corn.
Wow.
Go look it up. It's crazy. I watched a YouTube video and it changed me.
Those of you listening to the podcast didn't get to see, but my head actually exploded while
So our next question from Discord was by our friend Mo from over on the This Is Game Boy podcast. He said, is Parasite Eve 2 really that bad, or is it just disregarded because it's different than the original? I was never able to finish it as a kid. I will be going back to it someday, but I remember at least liking the opening when entering the mall was a real sight to behold.
So this one's actually
funny. Before you mentioned that, I actually had people coming in my chat who said they had only played Parasite Eve 2.
Same.
Never had played 1, and that they loved Parasite Eve 2, but then everybody who had played 1 was like, Parasite Eve 2 is garbage, don't play it. So like, I want to know, because I'm interested in playing it, perhaps.
I can answer this quite simply, and it comes down to Parasite Eve. If you look at our huge melting pot, it's a crossover. We have survival horror players, RPG players, and they meet in the middle, because this is kind of like, this is technically more on the RPG side, I would consider, whereas Parasite Eve 2 is absolutely on the survival horror side. So if you prefer one of those styles, then you're going to usually prefer that game. Now, Parasite Eve 2 did come out later, so Aya's legs are much more proportionate to her body, thank God. But the graphics, they're well done, but it is absolutely, it's a hardcore tank controls, inventory management, everything is completely different. from the way that Parasite Eve 1 is. So it usually, like, you'll notice the RPG people will be like, Parasite Eve 2, no thank you. And the survival horror people will be saying it, you know, in reverse. So that's generally...
I love survival horror, so
I think they're both good games. I definitely have a favorite, but not because the second one sucks. It's
strange that they went such a different direction with this game coming out 1 year after Parasite Eve 1. You know what I mean? Like, usually if a game switches its styles that abruptly, it's like, okay, we haven't released a sequel in 5 or 6 years. Let's do something different. This is right after, and they're just like scrapping the whole thing.
I think that they had such a, like, we want to compete with Resident Evil. And when the first Parasite Eve came out, they were like, oh, this is not going to do it. And they decided to, like, commit a little bit harder to that. And unfortunately, the author disliked...
for them?
Yeah, the author disliked it so much that she actually retracted the rights to the game, which is why the third installment, which we pretend doesn't exist, the Third Birthday, it actually is not a Parasite Eve game. It's,
or at least doesn't have the license.
Exactly. It still has Aya because they don't, you know, those were all individual new names, but they couldn't call it Parasite Eve. It had to be called something different.
Now, would you say there's been more Resident Evil games since this time, or more Parasite Eve games?
What do you mean? Oh,
total. Which has been more successful, do you think? The
definitely. I want to say that Resident Evil is slightly ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, just by 1 or 2. Bruceinator on Discord asks, what's the scariest parasite outside of video games?
Definitely, without a doubt, the brain amoeba.
Okay.
So, yeah, watch the episode of Monsters Inside Me and be terrified of any body of water.
Brain-eating amoeba.
I'll say there's also these parasites or bacteria that'll take over. They're like the zombie bacteria that'll like take over a bug or whatever, and like the bug will be dead, but
that's the one I was gonna say. The cordyceps fungus.
Yeah.
How do you know that on the top of your head? Did you Google? Please say you Googled it.
I Googled it a few hours ago. But I mean, I did know it before. I just couldn't remember the name of it. But the cordyceps fungus is the one that The Last of Us is based on, the video game, where it sort of burrows into the brain of the creature, and it becomes basically singly minded to just climb to the highest point it can and then bite down and stay stuck there so that the fungus can grow out of its brain and propagate. It's horrific. It's terrifying. And if you ever watch a video of the cordyceps fungus, it will make you fear for breathing in fungus spores.
I've got one thing to say about that.
What?
You hate to see that happen.
You hate to see it happen.
You just hate to see that happen. Next question's from Crazy Awesome. He says, outside of the chase on the last day, which I think we universally said was probably suboptimal, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you dislike most about the game?
Just quantity of encounters. I mean, the museum, the quantity of encounters in the museum is my complaint.
Yeah, I guess because I speedrun and I avoid a lot of those extra screens because I know where I'm going, I don't feel the encounters as much. I think that my biggest complaint is that the Chrysler building is tucked away in a New Game Plus. It's incredibly difficult, so even attempting it requires time investment. And like I said, you have to replay the game, and you're sitting there like, okay, I just got to get through this to even be able to get started at where the good stuff is. And then once you have the good stuff, you don't need it because you've done everything.
You know,
so I think that,
right? Like,
yeah, exactly. I think that rearranging of stuff, you know, had they balanced that out maybe, or made it like a super boss dungeon that was optional, but, you know, not tucked away behind 4 or 5 replays or whatever, I think that they could have done a lot more. The game is relatively short. It did a lot of things well, but there is definitely some clunkiness in movement in the actual content itself. So probably that spectrum.
For me, it's probably the analog/holding circle thing, or a lot of the things we've mentioned. But I've got 2 things that I'm going to bring up just because we haven't brought them up yet. One, I really would have liked if this game was voice acted, especially if it was voice acted as poorly as Resident Evil 1. Like, that's a requirement. It feels like that would just step this up to a 9 right there. If we have like Jill Sandwich or something, like we're in there. I really honestly just feel like some of the complaints we've made throughout are kind of just the basic things, but you know, ultimately I think a positive experience. I think we all liked it. I agree that, you know, Crazy Awesome also had asked if the Chrysler building was kind of a crutch for the regular game being too short, and I think we all kind of have talked about that already, but like you've got this huge amount of content that most people miss out on, and it's a completely different pace and level than the rest of the game. It's just, I think it is a bit of a crutch to be like, oh hey, we got these 77 floors you can go up right here,
Yeah.
and it's like, okay, but that's not really in the game. Like, you don't.
My theory
Yeah.
that I mentioned during my stream was that the deaths that come after the cutscene and the final boss fight just are meant to address the same thing. I mean, they knew they made a 5 to 10 hour game, and it's like, well, we got to make this longer, so let's make a 30-minute cutscene plus boss fight that you will probably die immediately afterward 10 times.
Yeah, I don't think there's any casual player that didn't do that final day twice, at least.
And Odyssey does a similar thing, right? Like Odyssey, most of the content is new game, right? After you beat the game, there's a million moons and stars you can get. And in some ways, like, it can be the same as this, but like, I think, you know, they made it enough incentive laden to do it, I guess. You know, like, you need to be like, the Chrysler Building, if you don't do this, then you're missing out on something big. Whereas, like, you've already gotten the whole story, you've gotten a completed tale, so it's just like,
I think it depends on what it takes to get there. You know, Odyssey, like you mentioned with Odyssey, you know, there's a ton of really fun, great moons to get throughout the game, and it doesn't really feel like post-game. It just feels like beating that boss fight was unlocking the next phase of the game.
Extra levels. Yeah.
Right. Whereas with Parasite Eve, you beat the game and you see credits, and then you realize I'm still not good enough to play the 70% of the content on this disc.
Exactly.
So you're like, well, I've got to just do it again a few more times. And that, I think that at that point you start to have diminishing returns. Like at first you're maybe excited to go play the Chrysler Building, and then you realize, oh, I've got to do another playthrough. And every single time you do that playthrough, it's like, I'm less interested in the Chrysler Building at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I'm gonna say, actually, I had forgotten it. I lost it in my mind. But the thing that upsets me the most about this game that I would change is that after the level 4 boss, getting off the building, I didn't figure it out as a kid. I didn't know, and I had no internet to look it up, and so I never got to beat this game until 20-something years later.
That's basically the mini Day 6 chase scene. Like,
yeah,
it's like a
small
version of
I
it.
beat the boss 3 or 4 times, and I was like, I'm 12. I'm not.
Yeah.
I don't know. Listen to Creed or something. It was probably whatever it was.
It's rough.
The other, but yeah, the other thing that's frustrating is that if you hit the wrong button after the game happens, let's say I did this because I did, I canceled out of the save, and so if I want to do New Game Plus, I have to do the final boss in the escape sequence again.
Yeah.
So even though I beat it, I have to do it again to do New Game Plus because
Nice.
if you hit anything that's not X, you don't get to save in between. So that's.
You're probably pretty good at it now, so it's not a big deal. Anyway, is there anything else before we wrap this bad boy up?
I think we did a lot of Parasite Eve, more Parasite Eve than anybody expected.
Yeah.
It's been a great week of Parasite Eve. We got a nice long episode. Got a lot of details here.
Everyone tuned into this episode saying these boys are just going to phone this one in, and we absolutely did not.
Yeah, we did not do that. So, Palmer, if people are looking to watch you do some Parasite Eve or maybe some of these longer RPGs that you run, find you.
Twitch.tv/Professor_Palmer is my Twitch. That's definitely where I'm most active. You can find the links to my social media and things like that there.
Awesome.
Nice.
What about you, Chad?
You can find me on Twitch, Twitter, and YouTube at AuthorBlues. How about you?
You can find me at John Carls on Twitter and Twitch, John Carls1 at YouTube. If you're looking for podcast stuff, again, you can go to theframesavers.com. That has links to all of our different things, Discord and such. If you want your question read on the next episode, we'll have that posted with a room that you can do that. So go ahead and consider checking that out. You might hear your name read on the most famous podcast in the world. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon $25 a month patrons. These are people who donate $25 or more a month to us on patreon.com/theframesavers, which helps us pay for editing and hosting and a wide variety of things that we have to do, graphic design. So Tina Hacks, Mr. Pizak, Kip, and Drex, which is DDRREEXX. Go follow them all on Twitch. They're great people. They do some awesome content, and they're helping provide you content here with the Frame Savers. So you go support them. And also, as always, a shout out to our boys at Warp World. You can find them at podcast.warp.world. Go listen to Warp World and Warp World Historians. They're really awesome podcasts that we've joined that network. As always, thanks to Brian Morgenthau for producing this. You can find him at BMorps TV on Twitter and Twitch, and to Space Cow for helping organize the Q&A. And any last thoughts?
Play Parasite Eve, please. We need runners.
Yes, play Parasite Eve.
Mine is Mitochondria is the power cell. Hope you have a great week.
Later.